In that pitch-dark cave, bloodthirsty monsters wailed and clawed at the silenced screams everywhere, while the comrades rushed to apologize because one enemy had slipped away and was charging straight toward the hero. Gran snapped to attention, spun on his heel right behind him, stretched a bloody sea of fallen bodies. He yanked his inventory open, slammed his weapon into his grip, fired up his body enhancement, and braced himself for the fight. The enemy barreled straight at him, and Gran clenched his focus, bracing for the hit. Because in these dungeons, danger never takes a day off, and somehow, even here, you could still score a truly delicious meal. The monster lashed out with its long tail, snapped open its mouth, and whipped out its tongue. Then Gran got hit, and it blasted away. The enemy blasted spikes toward him, but Gran slammed his weapon up in time and swatted the monster out of the air, its howl cut off as it lost the will to fight. Gran spun around and caught the blade mid-scream, tearing the belly of a monster wide open. Then he yanked out its guts and froze, realizing what he'd just pulled free, only to unwrap the intestine like it was something he could take with him. Moments later, the enemy crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The hero snapped his magic to life and scanned the battlefield, hunting for what came next. They were all trapped in the dungeon's most monster-choked hell, and behind him, his comrades were still duking it out, so he fired out of breath, tightened his grip, and kept on snatching up trophies. Gran got snapped up by a crew of monster-hunting adventurers, and when they ran short on hands, he threw himself into the grime laboring and hauling gear as their porter. The brave knight clocked it. Almost everything was cleared, and now the only thing left was grabbing the loot. Then the hero sheathed his weapon, flashed a grin, and declared he was heading out. This space was forged from packed together mana. Every creature that died in that dungeon got broken down, turned into magic energy, and vanished, and the boy just stood there, surrounded by a battlefield of fallen enemies. Gran's job was simple but brutal: snatch up the valuable materials from the monsters before the bodies vanished for good. His partner said that in an A-rank squad, even the porter isn't just some ordinary guy, and the knight shot back that Gran is a complete combat unit, because to him, the porter's work is only a side job. Porters were usually the bottom-rung adventurers, weak in a fight, hired on the side from the fighters for a measly little fee. In Gran's case, he jumped into the group as the fighter too, and ended up playing porter as well, though it wasn't really meant to be that way. The boy grinned and started grabbing every last piece he needed. The other party members were absolute monsters, so he had no choice but to chase victory, grabbing trophies one after another. Suddenly, a torch flared to life on the wall, and the hero's world jolted with shock. His teammate clocked it instantly. Gran was barely fighting, just hunting loot like it was the only thing that mattered, and when the young man nodded, it was a dead-on confirmation. Then he kept loading food into his inventory, one item at a time. The chief knight pointed out that Gran's real edge was brutal. He could scoop up materials almost risk-free, no matter how the battlefield erupted, enemies swarming and projectiles tearing through the air, while he didn't flinch one bit. Even if a salamander lunges at him, he'll crush it steady, confident and cool as he hunts down high-ranking monsters, because he's got real combat in his blood, not porter-level skills. In the end, hiring the Grand One paid off way more than grabbing some cheap, low-ranking porter, and teaming up meant bigger income for all of them. Suddenly, Grant started whipping up food, and the witch rushed over, her stomach growling, demanding to know when it would be ready. The hero shot back that he wouldn't make them wait long, but the girl erupted in tears, begging for meat right from that salamander and to cook it up for her there, right then. The boy fought back, saying it wasn't ready yet. It still hadn't been skinned or properly prepared. Because he'd already cooked up the other meat, everyone had to make do, and then Elf swaggered over, eyes bright, telling them she was craving meat, even if the fish was decent. And when she heard dessert was coming too, her joy practically exploded. The young man shouted for everyone to set the table and bring out the food. Then, to everyone's shock, he started yanking a full table and a pile of chairs straight out of his inventory. The girls gasped in pure disbelief as Gran's mysterious magic bag actually worked, until they realized it wasn't magic at all, just a storage skill that could pull out anything they wanted. This rare skill got a crazy name, the magic bag. To dodge suspicion, he wore it on his belt and played it off like some harmless magical artifact that was hiding way more than it ever looked like. If word of it got out, it would spark serious trouble, so he clamped the secret down tight. Only a handful of trusted confidants ever got the real truth about his skill. The boy kept cooking, then realized it was time to set the table, so he shut off the stove and served up fried onions with minced wyvern and griffin meat. Then the hero seasoned it salt, pepper, and nutmeg, poured in a splash of milk, and tossed in the egg with the breadcrumbs. Everything got stirred together until it turned silky smooth while the others hurried to the table, buzzing with anticipation for that meal. Most adventurers lived on bland canned goods and dry rations, usually tasteless pretzels. So the hero started smashing minced meat into cutlets. One of the comrades blinked in shock. This dungeon had field food too, and he couldn't stop praising how insanely luxurious that survival meal looked. No matter what, getting ready took serious effort. While the young man carved his way through the work, he kept asking himself if he should pack food and utensils too, so he could cook right there with his storage skill, because the hero absolutely refused to choke down some bland, disgusting meal. Then right on cue, the frying pan with the cutlets slid onto the stove. The moment the dish was ready, steam blasted up from under the lid, and Grant rushed to apologize for the delay. Then everyone cheered, saying the meat was amazing and that the smell was unreal, and the guy grinned as he explained he'd fried extra so they'd have plenty to dig into. A mouth-watering dish hit the plates and the heroes dove in, mouths watering with pure anticipation. Everyone devoured it and grinned like they'd hit the jackpot, while the young man laughed at how happy they were. Grant's teammates elbowed for a shot at seconds, shaking their now empty plates like they couldn't believe it was over. A friend swore it was a real masterpiece, better than anything you'd get at a restaurant. And the team leader backed it up, saying whenever Grant's around, the group always scores that extra delicious bonus. So everyone left grinning. The boy snapped that he couldn't be bought with food. Even if that treat made him smile, he scarfed it down anyway because he was still growing, and little temptations like that never got to him. Then Gran slid right up, said dessert was ready too, and told him not to hold back. Everyone leaned in and started devouring the treat right away, and the protagonist, this B-rank adventurer who could fight and handle any job thrown at him, knew exactly why he belonged with the rest. After a while, the Adventurers Guild started buzzing. Then someone finally said "Grand," and the whole place took notice. One of his comrades dropped to his knees, begging forgiveness for every harsh word he'd thrown, then blurted out how grateful he was, while the young man lit up with pride and promised that starting right now, he'd push himself to reach B rank, just like Gran, no matter what. Grant warned him to slow down and not burn himself out. The leader smiled and promised they'd catch up later, then waved goodbye, and the hero couldn't help but feel how seriously attached that guy had become to him. Like the steak must have been so crazy good they'd slipped him extra food. The knight dangled a spot in his party for protection and prestige, but the young man politely shut it down, making the knight's irritation flare on the spot. He wanted to disappear into the dungeon with him for months to dig into research, and Grant admitted his biggest dream was simple: a real bed and a hot bath. Then the knight warned him not to bail out the next time, and the protagonist actually felt relieved. Grant was always ready to jump in and help, and honestly, he had no problem teaming up for the party because working together felt natural to him. He liked the plan of grinding through his role under a leader's watch, stacking up real rewards with his comrades, until Grant said no, refusing to join so he could stay independent. Because as a B-ranker, he didn't think he'd rise, and he was already eyeing a different path. A young man grabbed a breath of air, decided to wander the street to clear his head. Then, out of nowhere, a sign snapped his attention. It said they were hiring. His eyes widened, and he sprinted straight toward it. Grant figured the best chance was the one he couldn't afford to miss, and change was finally here. He ditched adventures, dove into farming, and took steady orders from the guild. The hero could have thrown himself headfirst into his passions, so Grant bought a quiet house out in the countryside, miles away from the city's non-stop noise, where he could use his skills without drawing unwanted eyes. Then, right after that, the young man finally chose to show what he really was. Cooking and crafting felt like pure freedom. Like his life finally had no limits. Then, right before he even touched the stove, Grant snapped back to who he used to be, because he still remembered everything from his past life. This world and this country were totally alien, like night and day from his past life in Japan. He grew up in a totally ordinary family, slid into an equally ordinary adulthood, and his whole life felt like a bland, empty road with zero real sparks. When he wasn't reading books or diving into video games, you could find him fully lost in whatever story pulled him in. Now it hit him. His old country was a total peace zone. No magic, no monsters, and no reason to pick up weapons or fight. That's why the kid got hooked on games where he could steer his own avatar, especially the fantasy worlds, and he loved anything that made him level up and hunt for rare items. The kid had way too much fun grinding up his hero slowly, boosting every stat and stuffing the inventory bigger and bigger, just addicted to that sweet feeling of progress. The hero couldn't recall what killed him in his past life, but blurry flashes of his old work and daily grind still haunted his mind. About 5 years after he was born in this new world, Grat suddenly got hit bam with a massive flood of information in his head, memories from his old life. The boy yawned and greeted the morning. Then, as soon as he woke up, he jumped straight to opening his status window. He scrutinized every single stat like his life depended on it, then spotted a data panel. Gran leaned in and started breaking his numbers down piece by piece. And just like that, Grant could finally see his own gifts, skills, strength, and every other attribute. Then his personal status flashed, and the word hero hit hardest of all. The moment he laid eyes on that data, his whole life snapped into place. This job was exactly what it had always been, but no grand trial ever showed up. No fateful day came knocking. He stayed just an ordinary guy, even though it made no sense, because his father had already beaten the Demon King. When the status flashed the word hero, the young man's heart nearly leapt right out of his chest. Ever since he was a kid, people clocked just how sharp he was. Quick mind, razor memory, and even before his memories came back, he already felt that lonely distance closing in on him. He truly believed his own importance was just how the world should work, and the fact that he could try everything yet still fail gnawed at him, especially when his past life memories came roaring back. Still, the young man couldn't help himself. He chased the hero's path anyway, and within moments he realized it was a terrible move, so he bailed fast and abandoned it. The protagonist started leveling up his survival skills, hunting down weak monsters and tracking down forest animals, then harvesting them for everything they were worth. His childhood looked just like every other kid's in the village most days. Children helped adults who ventured past the village lines, and he'd grab whatever he could, wild fruits and herbs. The moment the boy grabbed a weapon, brand new skills surged to life in him. Hunting suddenly became faster and easier than for anyone else, and he could even trigger archery. When his skill finally hit that ceiling, his progress ground to a screeching halt, and soon he barely stood out among the other kids. Then came the crushing realization. He couldn't use magic at all. Gran's body shook as panic lit up his face. While the other kids were smashing through spell after spell, he couldn't land a single cast no matter how desperately he tried. When he checked his stats, one thing hit him like a truck: his magical power absolutely crushed everything else he had. But no matter what, Gran couldn't cast a single spell. Watching everyone around him sling spells with ease, the young man's envy flared and he felt nowhere near good enough. Even by age 10, his magic was just a touch above average, stuck well behind the kids who were truly blowing minds. Crushing defeat settled in so deep, the dream of a heroic path finally died out, and this world stayed weirdly calm, so he just kept staring off into the distance. Monsters weren't myth at all. They were treated like a normal part of the world's own cycle. Nobody saw the universal evils show up. No demon king rampaging through the world, only whispers about a demi-human kingdom called the demons, where their ruler sometimes got the nickname the Demon King. But nobody talked about conquests or wars, just the most everyday trade over and over. That young man kept spiraling on what it really meant to be a hero until he became an adventurer. Then he learned the truth. The title wasn't for saving the world or having special powers. It was for the ones who actually pulled out weapons and used magic. At 12, the kid finally earned his spot in the guild and decided it was time to blaze a new trail for himself. He had his reasons for chasing the adventurer life as fast as he could, and even after everything about who he used to be vanished, he sparked a brand new hunger, the Explorer gift. This gift was built for research, digging up answers, sifting clues, and processing every scrap of info, whether it was something you could hold or something you couldn't, letting you hunt, study, and hoard knowledge and items like a total cheating weapon. That storage skill let him shove basically anything into a special virtual pocket: space plants, even microorganisms included, as long as it had no will of its own, and it turned out to be insanely useful. At first, the space was tiny, but once the skill level shot up, it grew bigger, and even let you tweak how time moves inside it. Pikachu stored there With the skill finally mastered, Grand hunted monsters non-stop, then pushed even harder, training and hauling in every material he could get his hands on. The hero went wild with that inventory and list anything he stashed in the vault became searchable with a tap of the search skill. And the boy stopped caring about his own fate because Gran was out gathering materials, and that obsession took over everything. After becoming an adventurer, he tore across every region he could find, stalking monsters, pushing into wild, unexplored corners, and slipping in undetected to scoop up every last resource. The young man soaked up this freedom and couldn't stop loving every second of it, grabbing objects and materials like treasures because it honestly felt magnificent. Gran skidded to a stop on the grass, popped open his inventory, and grinned as he rifled through everything he'd managed to snag. Relief hit him so hard he finally exhaled. He dropped onto the ground, stared up at the sky, and felt his whole soul get purified. And now that the hero finally had his own home and secret base, he leaned on everything he'd gathered and every skill he'd earned, and took the first step toward living on his own. Even when you tried everything and still failed, it taught you more than you'd think. Especially if you weren't chasing perfection at all costs, and instead used your crafting skills and whatever resources you'd already gathered to grow. As Gran strolled down the street, he spotted some crazy-looking treasures in a display, and his companion leaned in and said, "During the fair, merchants from all over come flooding in from every city, so people can hunt down the really valuable stuff. The goods are the treasures." The young man and the boy strolled through the loud, crowded streets side by side, cracking up while they tested all kinds of materials and potions, like every block had a new surprise waiting. The protagonist asked Kershi how his shop was doing, and the boy shrugged it off, said it was all fine, then explained that today was its Tsukeichi, when a huge fair pulls the crowds away, so barely anyone shows up, meaning his sister had been stuck working in the shop. He added that going after fairs like that is just part of the job. Suddenly, Grant stopped dead in his tracks, spotting something up ahead. The seller stepped up to the kid and said the weird object finally arrived from a faraway land. Then the hero leaned in and demanded where it came from, only for the seller to drop the rumor it was said to be from a place way out in the Far East. Turns out, he bought it himself in a port city across the state line, so he didn't know the details for sure. Still, he figured the best stuff was already gone, even if a few rare treasures were hanging around. The protagonist studied the object like it was evidence, rolling it over and over in his hands and abacus, and Kirke froze in shock because his brothers somehow knew exactly what it was. The boy beamed, grinning like he'd seen it in some old book, and then he chuckled, convinced these were memories from a past life. The seller confessed he'd snagged the abacus thinking it was a musical instrument, but it wouldn't move off his hands, so he dropped the price and offered it cheap to Grant, who clocked the black stuff in the bottle and knew it was from the eastern lands. Then he shot a quick sideways look. The salesman shrugged and said nobody wanted a bite of his liquid, so it was dirt cheap. Turns out it was bean-based seasoning, but it reeked in a way that made people back off, and the hero asked to smell it anyway. They let him try, but warned that the stench was going to hit like a punch. After a couple deep breaths, the young man shot out, "I'll give it everything I've got, and if there's more, I'll buy every single last thing." Furious sniffed hard, trying to catch what the smell was. The salesman burst out laughing and said, "I'm all out, nothing left." Gran blurted out if he could get that black liquid by heading east, and the seller swore he'd picked it up in Overo, the port city, sitting east of Schillendor. Then said he'd snagged it from a merchant who came from some strange foreign land. The protagonist asked the seller if any eastbound goods had wheat-like grains, and the seller shut him down, then smirked and said, "Go check Owaru, you might stumble on something wild." The salesman yanked open the box and pulled out the bottle and alcoholic drink he'd bought from that same merchant, and Grant froze when it turned out to be clear, with just a faint little smell. The man smirked and said it cost a bit more, then leaned in and asked if Grant wanted it. The hero shot back a confident yes and got ready to pay then. As a sweet bonus for buying them, he was handed seeds labeled Rayon fruits. The moment he cracked open the package, pure shock hit him because what was inside was way crazier than he expected. The young man snapped his appraisal skill into action, couldn't grab the rice yet, but he sure could confirm it was real, and that memory hit him hard. In his past life, rice turned into alcohol was called sake. Sometimes, Gran would cross paths with strange moments that yanked him back to memories from his past life. Somewhere out there, other people are probably still guarding the memory of Japan like it's a treasure they refuse to let fade. He couldn't stop wondering, would he ever find someone like that? Kirsch suddenly closed in on Gran and demanded to know exactly what he'd bought. Gran admitted it was soy sauce and rice sake. The boy admitted he'd never seen anything like it and begged to know what it was for, so the young man pulled out an abacus and broke down how it worked, only for the boy to gasp that something like that could actually be used for counting. He said that the abacus, even though it looked simple, made huge numbers feel manageable, and you could learn it fast if you had to. You could order one from a local craftsman, or even build it yourself, and Kershey was blown away by how well-informed he was. Grant admitted that crafting those invoices is brutally time-consuming, but if you give it enough hours, it's totally doable. He's sure whoever takes the job will pull it off. The boy bursts out that if this abacus made counting easier, it'd be a miracle for the merchant. Then he kept demanding over and over that someone teach him how to use it. Grant explained that the creepy black liquid was just soy sauce made from beans and packed with a punchy, unmistakable smell, and that the other thing they bought was sake, a strong rice alcohol people sip, cook with, and use for flavoring everything. Kershey burst out laughing, saying it was delicious, and Gran finally had a point, so the hero rushed in to clear things up, explaining that adventurers see everything, and the boy just grinned like, "That's exactly why my friend is one." Kershey watched the hero chase new horizons and felt envy burn in his chest, because all he'd ever done was bounce between neighboring towns just to snag supplies he craved the day he'd go somewhere fresh and see it with his own eyes. And then Grant stepped in with a job offer. Security guard. Right on one of his upcoming trips. Kershey wore a huge blush. But Grant shut the doubt down and said a long trip with no protection was unthinkable. Seeing Jurashi swallowed his pride, agreed the adventurer would have his back, and pointed even farther ahead to a kiosk packed with ready-to-eat food. They decided to rush over and scan the lineup for the perfect pick. The young man racing ahead jabbed at the perfect spot to the right, and right there, huge hunks of meat sizzled on the grill, smelling unbelievably good. The heroes finally halted, breathing in that incredible aroma and savoring every second. After grabbing their share, they plopped on a bench and dug into the food snack after snack, while the protagonist and the boy tore through every exquisite bite, savoring every second like it might disappear. While they were eating, Gran dropped that he'd gotten a ticket for buying shashlik at a guild-run store. Then Kershey revealed it was a merchant guild lottery ticket you earned through their affiliated shops. While he was chowing down there, he snagged a ticket and the merchants told him, "Eat up, then try your luck in the lottery." The hero straight up said his body was the main tool, so he had to eat like crazy, and the boy just couldn't stop eyeing that chance to try every kind of food under the sun. They spotted a few leftover dishes on the counter they hadn't even tasted yet, and pushed each other to sample a little of everything. The boy promised, "If there's even a scrap left, I'll eat it myself," so Kershey could try more dishes. Then the moment Kershey got embarrassed, he snapped back, Yeah, I've already had more than enough." The hero grinned and burst into laughter, thinking, if I'd guessed this sooner, that boy could have gone tasting tons of even more delicious stuff. The young man flashed a nervous smile, cheeks burning as he hurriedly reassured his friend that it was all good, and that the next Itsukate he'd finally grab whatever he wanted. Strangers along the street froze in shock, watching the wild spectacle while the protagonist, bull carcass strapped to his back, marched straight up to the house. The hero glanced at the heavy load and told Kershey to point out where they'd shoved the carcass before it became a problem. The girl burst out of the house, spotted Kershey back on the scene, and blurted, "So, how'd your Itsukate go?" She burst out congratulating them for coming back, then froze dead in her tracks when she spotted the huge, heavy beast sitting on Gran's shoulders, while Kershey stood right in front, grinning with pure joy at seeing his sister. The girl tried to process what she'd just witnessed. Then, without warning, she erupted into a blood-curdling scream. Gran broke it all down for them, explaining that Kershey had snagged this prize in the lottery, a whole carcass of meat. The boy added that only someone strong like Gran could haul something that huge, and the girl finished it off by confirming it was the carcass of a black buffalo. The hero told everyone his power came from his body enhancement skill, and Kershey straight up pointed out that in a backwater like Piedmont, You almost never meet anyone who can hoist a buffalo carcass with ease. Then his sister added that even among top-tier adventurers, that kind of strength is still a rarity. The boy threw out a quick apology for making her wait, but she snapped back that it was their timing that slipped, not him. Then the protagonist eased the carcass down, and they got to butchering. Turns out it was way easier than anyone expected. Because of all the help they'd given in butchering, they were allowed to take the meat and bones, and when they heard they wouldn't even need the bones and tail, they finally let the young man claim every last bit. The boy blinked in shock when they let him take both his tongue and tail, then stared even harder when they told him bones could be used for anything. They leaned in and told him buffalo tongue is wild in texture and crazy good, especially stewed or fried. The tail's perfect for boiling into a rich soup, and even the bones get thrown into the mix to build the broth and fuel the alchemy. Kershey was blown away by Grant's cooking skills. Grant admitted he'd spent nights out in the wilderness, forced to eat monsters and whatever he could find, then cook everything right on the spot, and that grind taught him everything. The boy grinned and said he'd already split the meat into portions, stunned by how massive the haul was. 2 whole carcasses, though they weren't huge, while Grant fretted that they'd have trouble eating it all before it went bad. The hero snapped back that the meat had to be eaten or sold right away, and if they smoked it, it would keep for way longer. Same deal for the drinks and every provision the adventurers carried. The boy finally got his logic, locked onto the plan, and went straight for it. He cornered Kersha and pitched dinner that night, saying they had meat ready and could crash there too, and the young man snapped it up without a second thought. The boy immediately started shouting that they had to cook steaks right now, and the protagonist agreed, choosing a cut from the animal's idle parts, the section it never used to move, so it came out tender. Grant told everyone to spice it up with market soy sauce and garlic, swearing that flavor would blow the dish wide open. The boy then leaned in and said, "If you let me use the kitchen, I'll cook it myself." And with unstoppable excitement, he blurted out how badly he wanted to try a steak made by a true master. Maybe it was a habit he carried from a past life. This young man handled rudeness like it mattered, with this crazy care. And when he had seasoning he actually knew and meat that was worth it, he couldn't just sit back. He had to cook for himself. He flicked the stove on, then tore into the vegetables with his knife, chopping everything up fast while the boy worked. Kershey just watched, locked in. They drizzled oil into the pan, tossed in the veggies, and let everything simmer. Soon, the whole kitchen lit up with mouth-watering smells. Kersha blurted, "I'm starving already," and they told him to wait a little longer. But the boy grabbed the frying pan and started pouring the seasoning onto a plate. They'd already prepped the meat. It shimmered like it was itching to be used, so the young man dove in and started slicing. He tore it into thin layers like it was showtime, finished the prep work, and then together they dusted the meat with salt and pepper. The meat hit the frying pan with a sizzle. The hero started sizzling away, and when the girl came up, she practically swooned at the delicious smell. "Everything was almost ready," he blurted out. The older sister called on Kershey to handle the preparations, and he bolted out to help her the second she asked. Once both sides are browned, he cranked the heat down and let the meat keep cooking a little longer, aiming for a juicy medium since that's what he loved most. Then he tipped the rest of the sauce from the plate straight over the top. Gran poured in the soy sauce, and the boy's eyes lit up. His smile spread fast, and his mouth started to water at the sight. The young man set the black buffalo steak on a plate, and the moment it hit the surface, everything lit up and filled the air with that irresistible aroma. Then he hauled the dishes to the table and declared it was finally all ready, thanking everyone for their patience. They were already settled at the table, digging in as they popped juicy bites into their mouths, and the girl and the boy lit up instantly. Everyone savored that mouth-watering feast together, and pure happiness spread across the room. Kershey couldn't stop raving that the flavor and smell were mouth-watering, and his older sister chimed in that black buffalo was so tender it barely felt tough. She'd braced for meat that would come out chewy and sinewy, but it wasn't. The hero tore into the meat with a grin, loving every second of what was unfolding, then soaking in the vibe around him. They grilled him about the black sauce, and at first the smell hit weird, like it didn't belong. Then the heat kicked in and it turned mouth-watering, teaming up with garlic like it was made for it, a rare seasoning from a far-off land he'd never seen before. Kershey was stunned. The kid had no clue what ingredients went into the whole thing. The boy let out a sigh and admitted he knew exactly what it was and how to make it. but the process was brutal and mind-bending. So Kershi decided, fine, I'll do it myself. The boy rolled the bottle over in his hands and declared that if this seasoning ever hit the mainstream, it would shake up the entire culinary world. Then he told him to track it down with the merchants he personally knew. Back in the capital, the protagonist had hunted for all of this 2-0, worked so when it finally happened today, he could only grin and say he'd gotten lucky. The boy shot back asking if it came from the east, and the hero nodded sure, but getting to the easternmost edge would take a full month each way, and everyone swore it was imported from some far-off eastern kingdom. Chasing it would drain time for days, and the hero could already picture himself heading out on that road. The hero thought, maybe I should beg a mage who masters teleportation, but absolutely not his friend. And yeah, he told me that if he even did go, it wouldn't be for ages, because he just bought a house and wanted to lay low for a while. As for the soy sauce, Gran could figure it out another time. Dark had already swallowed the sky, and an owl perched above the village, watching everything below. Meanwhile, the young man taught Kirker the ropes of accounting. His older sister clattered the tableware into place, and they traded talk about drinks, soy sauce, and the abacus like it was treasure, until the hero finally slipped into a quick bath to shake off the day and feel sharp again. Morning broke, and he bowed to his hosts, thanking them for the ride and the breakfast, then promised that next time he'd show up with potions ready to go. The girl and boy yelled goodbye at him as they watched him fade away. Then Kershi turned to Gran and swore they'd see each other again for real. The hero figured he should add a new abacus to his potion plans, and he even started crafting a ring to make his carried gear feel lighter, because Gran wanted that ring to fight back a little if danger ever struck. The forest Gran got trapped in was a jackpot everywhere he looked. The place glittered with light, wrapped in a soft, hazy fog. The hero snapped to attention as he started snatching local plants in shock. Then he ripped open his status bar to keep a close eye on his dwindling food supplies. The young man hauled his hard-earned haul into his bag, knowing this greenery would refill the store's stock. Yet his instincts screamed there was more out there, so he reached in and drew a small dagger. If he'd never met Kershi, he swears he'd still be hiding out alone in this forest, because the moment he arrived, Kershi showed up soon after, right when his quiet life was about to change. Gran perched on a stump and tore into a delicious lunch, fully savoring every bite. It all went down just outside the city of Viscounty Sortel in Piedmont. It was a sleepy provincial town, miles from the capital, but because it sat on the road to the border, people and goods never stopped streaming through. Out past the town, the nearby forest teemed with magical creatures, and right in town there was a tiny adventurers guild waiting to pull you in. Because it sat right on the trade route to the country's outer edges, this city became the merchant guild's no-nonsense logistics hub. Plus, it packed inns and all the essentials they needed to keep the caravans moving. The hero strode into the local spot, demanded the dish of the day, and right on cue, they slammed down a plate so hot, thick steam billowed up like a warning. Today's special was wild boar stew, and the moment it hit the air, it shimmered with an insanely mouth-watering aroma that made everyone lean in. Gran snatched up the food, shoved it into his mouth, and basically went, "Whoa, this is amazing!" That rich fat turned sugary and vanished on his tongue, and the usually tough boar meat crumbled like soft bread he'd only stumbled into the place by chance. But man, was it a win! He dove in, scooped the fragrant dregs from the bottom, and gulped them down with hungry delight. Gran shot him a grateful grin, dropped a few coins as thanks, and then the hero went straight for the Adventurers Guild office in Piedmont. Gran climbed the stairs and strode up to the notice board, then started scanning the tasks like they were her next big chance. The girl in the chair snapped her head up in shock, and Grant strode over telling her he wanted to switch his registered office to this branch, then fired off the question. Was it even possible? She jolted again, wide-eyed, and basically asked the hero for confirmation. Grin handed her his ID, and the employee's eyes went wide when she saw he already had a B rank turns. Out Gran had just moved and decided to register. And when she heard that, she lit up, because their department barely ever gets adventurers with that kind of rank. He fired back, saying, yeah, he might be B rank, but he's not exactly strong, so don't bank on him. He just moved in. His apartment sits out of town, and he's not trying to jump into a bunch of missions anytime soon. The girl's face instantly fell. She told him, please take a few assignments sometimes. And he shot back, when I'm in the mood to work, I won't waste time with unnecessary questions. And once I'm settled in, I'll jump in and help for real. He was ready to step out, but the girl shouted after him, pleading for him to change his mind. So Gran spun back to the notice desk, dropped in his eyes, and kept reading. It wasn't anything wild, and he already knew he'd grab them the next time he came by. Then he stormed into the Merchants Guild alive with chaos, chatter, and dozens of vendors, and stepped inside like he had a mission. Even here, he had to update his registration. He shoved over his ticket and rattled out a few coins. Sure, adventurers earned rank by skills and victories, but merchants climbed the ladder by paying the guild's yearly membership fee just to stay registered. And right now, Gran was stuck doing only street trading at the local market. Because all he could do was street-level bending, his registration fee was basically pocket change, so low it was the absolute bottom rank, E rank. To trade at the Itsukaichi Bazaar, you had to march to the reception desk and file an application first. Gran walked up. The girl told him to fill out the form, and only after that did he have to buy the required goods. The protagonist strode along the mountain outskirts, thinking he'd already scavenged everything he needed to survive hell. Even his bag still had space for the vegetable seeds he'd managed to get. That kid started humming under his breath, practically buzzing with anticipation as he waited to toss them into the beds. Then boom, a blinding glow erupted behind him, and he spun around, eyes wide with fear, staring straight ahead. He spun around and caught a nasty snap behind him like two huge monsters crashing together. It echoed out by the road, so he yanked his weapon from his belt and charged to see what just hit. A savage roar thundered through the forest as the beast smashed through trees and let out a brutal scream. Then the two predators slammed into each other, jaws wide and fangs bared. A raging boar and a colossal stone python faced off, growling through their teeth as they stared each other down. He figured both animals were trophy gold and dinner, so he decided to play the third man and grab the spoils. And he even bragged about how good that boar tasted after he'd just eaten it. The young man snapped on his body enhancement and flooded it with magic. Then with one savage swing, he blasted the energy straight out of his weapon. The hero launched over the brawling crowd and drove a crushing counterattack. He ended up right where the fight peaked, then snapped his weapon through with a vicious swing and dropped one of them. The stone python crashed to the ground, dead and still. Then it snapped into the boar. The boar shrieked and snapped its jaws at the boy. Whipped around. Then Grant swung his hand hard. Suddenly, the boar's carcass dropped too, and it hit the ground, cold and lifeless. Grant let out a deep breath, swung his weapon again like it was a final victory lap, and wiped the fresh blood off the blade. The kid flicked his hand, cracked open his inventory, and started shoving the fallen bodies inside. Then, right off the road, something caught his eye. He couldn't help but wonder if anyone got caught in the chaos, so he leaned into the cart to check. Grant reckoned the driver had slipped free, so he decided the best move was to chase him along the shoreline, because it felt like the guy might still be close enough to find if they just searched a little. The hero spotted a boy crumpled in the bushes near the cart, bruised to hell, unconscious but still breathing, and looking way too young to be left like that. Grant lunged over, scooped him up, and blurted, "How you feeling?" Because there was no way that kid wasn't hit hard. He hoisted the boy into the cart, then hurried to the horse's wound and flushed it with water as the animal whined in pain. Still, the protagonist leaned close and asked if it could pull the cart, and the horse answered with a grateful, loud whinnier, like it was ready to move. Dawn broke, and the horse and cart kept rolling forward. Then the hero spotted something moving right behind them. The boy shot up, scanning everything and demanding his merchandise, and Gran snapped, "Are you awake?" Then the young man asked who the main character was, and blurted out that there were giant monsters everywhere. The hero shot him a confident grin, and swore he'd already wiped out the monsters. Then the cargo exploded across the cart, flipping it on its side, so they decided to rush for Piedmont before night fully dropped. The protagonist shrugged and said he was just some random passerby, and the boy instantly stared in shock. He demanded, "Was it me who won that fight?" And the boy nodded, because in his eyes, the great boar and the stone python were just huge monsters, not all that dangerous. He even asked if it was fine to head to Piedmont, and the kid told him, "I'm just going back there." Then he turned and asked, "Did you save me?" He said it was pure luck that he just happened to be there at the perfect moment. Then the boy suddenly thanked him. Suddenly, the young man jolted and winced hard. His leg was wrecked and screaming with pain. He realized it happened when the carriage lurched, and he swore he had to get that healing potion down. No excuses. The young man thrust the potion into the boy's hands, and the kid grabbed the bottle, nodded hard, and drank a couple of quick sips. Boom. It hit fast, packed with magical energy, meant to be taken by mouth and perfect for injuries just like this. The protagonist leaned in and demanded, "So, did that potion actually help?" The young man admitted it, apologized for all the trouble he'd caused, and then Kershi stepped in and introduced himself. He told them he'd been stuck helping his parents at their shop in Piedmont. Then the kid burst out wanting to thank his savior, so he volunteered to escort the hero right to the shop and even asked Kershaw what the potion costs. The boy shot back that there was nothing to thank him for, and the young man started gushing about the potion, how he'd made it himself, only for Kershi to ask if the protagonist even knew how to brew stuff like that, shocking him. Then Kershi calmly explained that he could already whip up simple potions. The boy practically exploded with excitement, and his eyes gleamed the moment he realized the potion was brewed by the hero himself. Then he blurted out, over and over, demanding to know what herbs grew near his house. Kershaw shot his hand out and yanked him in close, demanding the hero come with him to the store. He had something important to talk about too, and the young man couldn't help but feel a little flustered. They didn't stop for a second side by side. They pushed forward until the city finally came into view. The merchant Kershi strode up to the hero, eyes lighting up as he recognized a real adventurer, and clocked exactly where the kid's gear came from. The boy asked if he was staying at the inn, and Gran grinned, saying his home was out in the nearby forest. Kershi spotted that the forest teemed with animals and wild monsters, and the hero shot back that he didn't know the exact count, only that he'd set up a monster barrier, making the place way more survivable. The boy figured he'd be hunting potion ingredients in the forest too, and boom, he was right. Kersh's pitch was all about medicinal potions, and the boy didn't hesitate to confirm it, explaining that the old woman who'd run the apothecary in Piedmont for years finally got too old and shut her shop down, leaving them scrambling through a serious shortage of potions. They hurried to the neighboring town, loaded up on potions, and sold them back locally, but the travel fees kept the prices brutal, and their shipments were tiny, so everything was a struggle. That's when Gran figured out this was exactly why they were coming to him. The boy said, straight up, that if it really worked, they'd be insanely grateful. Crane couldn't stop wondering whether the whole thing hinged on the deal's terms, but before he could worry too long, they were already at the store, and everyone was shocked at just how fast they got there. If you're in Piedmont, you've got to hit the Pesaro department store because it's got absolutely everything. Lights blazed in the windows of Passerot's shop, and Kershaw burst inside, shouting that he was finally home. His sister practically burst with joy when he finally came back, and Kershaw snapped that they'd been slowed down because a monster ambushed them on the road. The girl, still shaking, hurriedly asked if he was okay, and he reassured her he was, because a hero had saved him, and he'd invited that same hero back as a thanks for what they'd done. He introduced Gran to his older sister, Alicia, and she bowed with a bright smile, saying how thrilled she was to finally meet him. Then she pointed out she was Kershaw's older sister and thanked him for looking out for Kershaw. He whipped around, stunned at what he just heard, then stared at the girl like, "Wait, I only came out for a stroll and I killed the monster while I was here." But the real punch to the gut hit when he realized the truth. It wasn't some stranger at all. It was his younger sister, and she looked so much like him. A burst of joy lit up her face. She tugged her hat down and told Gran she couldn't be alone, so when she went shopping, she dressed like a man, asked Gran to wait inside, and swore she'd unload the goods fast. Alicia asked for an escort to the reception area, warning them they were shutting down soon, and Gran offered to help unload. Yeah, not just to look good. Soon, the heroes kicked back with warm tea, and Alicia rushed to apologize for forcing the boy to do the store chores only for him to grin and say he was an adventurer, used to the grind, and that he truly didn't mind being unloaded. The Kershi family lit up and thanked Gran for all his help, especially for backing up their younger sister, then offered him payment, a gift, or anything from the shop as a thank you. The main character's mind raced, and the thought hit like a jolt. He clocked that he'd just moved here, decided to try his luck in trade, so he'd already signed up with the Merchant Guild, but he still hadn't picked his exact game plan yet, and at first he figured he'd set up a stall at the bazaar. He asked if they'd spare him a corner in the store so he could sell his goods on commission. The protagonist leaned in and said, yeah, he'd gladly pay for the space, no problem at all. And he added that those potions they'd been talking about could be a total game changer. Kershey blurted out in shock the moment she heard it. She was absolutely stunned. The girl pushed to talk potions straight on, swearing wholesale was the smartest. Playgran nodded fast, because if they bought the potions from him, he'd be able to sling the rest of the goods on consignment in a little corner of the store. Kershey blinked in shock. This adventurer was actually smiling at the offer, and Grant admitted he never meant to dive into serious trading. He only planned to pitch a tent at the market and take it step by step, and the girl was already shouting that everything was lining up perfectly. Alicia gasped when she learned the stranger could brew potions, and the hero doubled down, claiming he could even concoct a high-ranking one, making the girl light up like she just witnessed magic. The guy claimed that when adventurers brew their own potions, they slash their spending hard, and he told her to check the vials for ID with the identification skill, so the girl instantly grabbed his perfectly clean, sparkling bottles and inspected them right away. The girls couldn't believe it. The potions were insanely good, like better than our old pharmacy stuff. Wasn't even close to accurate, and they absolutely blew away the ones they bought back in the neighboring town. They marched up to Gran and politely pushed for a formal supply deal with them. He told the guy he couldn't churn out potions in massive batches, but he swore he'd make every single one he possibly could. Kersey quickly told us this stretch had no real heavy monsters, and since the settlement was tiny, we wouldn't burn through potions in bulk. Most folks just kept chugging healing potions far more often than the high-ranking stuff. They also scrambled for cheap antidotes to wipe out snake and insect venom. Alicia ordered Kirche to fetch the contract, and the girl bolted forward without a second thought. Then Alicia snapped around to the adventurer, wearing a chillingly serious face. She wasted no time and cleared every financial detail right away. The girl's sudden smile hit like a spark, and the stranger's composure crumbled into cold sweat because it was already deep night, and moonlight washed the whole street in silver. When morning finally broke, the boy realized Piedmont's potion cravings weren't coming from big-shot adventurers. They were the locals who wanted them most. Most people didn't buy potions to heal people. They grabbed them to slam their stamina back into place. The whole point was simple. Give people a powerful hit at a price they could actually afford, because no scary monsters were lurking nearby anyway. Even tourists went for the cheap potions, so he zeroed in on the price-to-power ratio, hunting for the best bang for his buck at every turn. He rolled up his sleeves, hummed a ready-to-fight tune, and started gathering yarrow, eggplant leaves, and cedar vines to brew a healing potion, then tossed in a sunstone to jack up his mana reserves. Then he kicked off the brewing, tore every ingredient apart piece by piece, and only his skill would decide if he could manage. Sure, grinding was easy, but the more twisted the structure or the heavier the mana in the potion, the harder it got to break it down. Next, the adventurer dumped the ingredients into a mortar, soaked them in mana, and ground them non-stop until the whole thing turned into a silky, smooth paste. He didn't know the spell, but he could pour mana into anything he touched. So he mixed that herbal paste with sunstone into the water, then simmered it slow and low, stirring non-stop until the mana spread through it perfectly. He simmered the mixture for about an hour, let it cool, and then bottled the potion into tiny vials using his appraisal skill to test it. The potion's quality didn't come from luck. It rose and fell based on the ingredient's condition and the way he worked and controlled mana while mixing. If the raw materials were top tier and the mana was controlled just right, you could brew a high-level potion, and every single part of it boiled down to the mixer's skill, so the protagonist confidently ran the same brewing steps again, just like before. Gran mixed a bunch of special additives and brewed out potions so strong and top tier they were basically unbeatable. He kept cooking and cooking, tossing in new ingredients with every try, and wouldn't stop cooking even for a second. That young guy looked at the monster he'd caught and thought, I'm not wasting this, then started turning its flesh into a snack. That plain snake would have been a pain with all those little bones, but this carcass was so gigantic there wasn't much to worry about. Still, gutting it was going to be a real grind. After the meat was cleaned, he doused it generously with salt, pepper, and thyme. Then he went for the seasoning, and right after, he tossed in blending flour with an egg and just a pinch of salt until it all came together. Then he tossed in a secret ingredient. He flicked his hand, and his inventory instantly popped open. He yanked out a bottle of alcohol, took a bold sip from the mug, and the hero muttered that the drink would have hit harder if he'd waited for the main course. Then he clocked the real fix. For a crunchier crust, add some ale and really whisk that batter until it's smooth. The adventurer swore he'd whip up a side dish, then pulled out the potatoes and started slicing them fast. He decided to slice the potatoes with the skins still on, then dunked the pieces in water and fired up the oil to heat. The young man wolfed down the potatoes, then tossed the meat in flour and plunged it straight into batter. The oil hits the perfect heat, and now it's time to drop those little dough pieces straight into the boiling oil. That aroma was straight up irresistible. Like it begged you to grab another mug of ale, so he got busy frying up potato slices too, grinning as the batter slowly turned that perfect golden color, and the hero hummed right along. He finally decided everything was set just the way it was supposed to be. The food hissed and shimmered like it was alive, and the guy leaned in like, wait, this isn't fish, because it was the real deal. He grabbed a huge plate of the dish and then slathered on the sauce. The protagonist snatched up his chopsticks and dived into the first bite only for the dish to be scorching hot, burning his lips on contact. The young man took one bite, and his eyes lit up. The flavor was delicate but barely tinged with that fishy edge, and the gentle salt hit just right, while the thick meat gave it a satisfying bite and the rich, savory broth felt downright addictive. Dunked in vinegar, it hit you with a sharp, thrilling aftertaste, and man, it was amazing, especially when paired with ale. He took a sip and swore this was the opening he'd been waiting for. Then he leaned in and studied the plate. The sun blazed overhead as he hurried straight to Kirsch's place. Then she lit up, greeted him with a grin, and practically gushed about how happy she was he'd finally arrived. The young man greeted the girl too, then proudly announced he'd brought freshly brewed potions only for Kirchi to freeze in shock because they'd talked about this yesterday. With everything hanging in the air, they decided to inspect the inside first and let him move on. Inside, he greeted Alicia while she bustled away in the kitchen. The girl greeted Gran and he told her he'd brought a potion right away. Alicia blinked in shock at how much there was, then leaned in and asked if he had any extra on hand. He told her he'd whipped him up in one batch the day before, grabbed only local ingredients, and making it happen was no big deal. Then Alicia couldn't ignore how that top-notch quality was going to carry them. She guessed that potion would stretch for about a week, and the hero swore he'd brew the same amount in a week, too. So the girl nodded, promised to double-check everything, and get the payment ready. Then she asked for a minute and yelled at Kirsha to prep the shop for opening. Meanwhile, the protagonist yanked out his dish, dropped it on the table, and told him it was a treat because he'd finally snagged some free time, and his preservation skill kept it tasting fresh. Kirshi couldn't believe it. Gran had cooked the dish himself, so he practically begged everyone to take a bite and taste his handiwork. The girl took a bite, and the smile on her face lit up like she'd just found her new favorite flavor. Alicia told Gran the payment was ready, then slid a fresh-baked bite his way, and the offer genuinely caught her off guard. She took one bite and lit up, saying everything tasted amazing. Then Kirshi burst out, "Grandma's cooking is insanely good too," and she figured it had to be fish meat. The young man cut in and blurted that it was rock python meat, and the girls went totally still, then leaned in and studied the food like detectives. They admitted they never imagined a snake could taste so good, and yeah, they'd mistaken it for fish. The hero told them he'd cobbled his meal together from scraps, and somehow it tasted way better than he ever expected, so Gran was like, "I've got you," and offered to treat them, as long as they were cool with it. He still needed a bigger cauldron and a handful of tiny potion vials, so he walked up to the shop and asked if they had them ready in stock. Kirshi confirmed it. "Yep, we've got a bunch of different types, and we'll even hook you up with a discount." So Alicia asked if that was really possible, and Kirshi said, "Absolutely," then promised they'd be thrilled to keep working together. The moment the heroes gathered, they started firing ideas about what's next and got ready to jump into trading. His home sat right at the forest doorstep, where the wild stretched out as far as the eye could see. Nobody went stomping into that thicket, so no one knew what was hiding inside. Plus, there weren't any terrifying monsters lurking there either, so adventurers had zero reason to make it their moneymaker. But the place was overflowing with plant life, so the hero hit the trail, hunting and grabbing every resource he needed. Not long after, he stumbled into a giant clearing in there. Standing in the open was a unicorn, blowing his mind wide open. Gran realized that beautiful was just a disguise. This unicorn was feral. It slammed its hooves into the water like it wanted blood, drawn to virgin humanoids, sweeping in to court them, while every other target got gored as the longhorn came for their guts. That beast was no joke. Then, out of nowhere, the unicorn snapped into action and charged the boy, horn aimed straight at him. The protagonist fired off one of his skills and sprang up several levels in a flash. Turns out, with the right move, even a unicorn could get taken down without breaking a sweat. With one clean, deadly swing, Gran slashed off the animal's horn. He sagged like a puppet and immediately lost strength, and the guy let out a huge sigh of relief. When a unicorn lost its horn, it didn't stay magic. It dropped back into a plain white horse until a brand new horn finally sprouted again. And while the hero swore the forest only held weak monsters, turns out you can run into unicorns too. The young man snapped into action and used his appraisal skill on the trophy. Then the unicorn horn flashed as a gold mine of ingredients for top-tier potions, cures for deadly ailments, and even universal elixirs. So Gran stretched, admired the stunning scenery, and called it time to take a breather. Before everything went down, the main character pulled out an abacus, showed it to his friends, and taught them exactly how to use it. At high noon, the boy dropped to the ground, poured himself a glass of milk, started humming like he owned the moment, and dug supplies out of his bag piece by piece. The second he took his first bite, he whipped around and spotted a goat creeping up behind him. That shock hit him hard because the beast was suddenly right there, breathing down Gran's neck, and the young man went cold with fear. He let out a shaky breath, his whole body trembling with terror, and he never even saw them creep in. The hero shoved a hamburger toward the creature, and it snatched the bite out of his hands with slick, sudden speed. The goat gulped it down in one bite, then started chewing like it was racing the clock. The protagonist clocked it instantly. There's no doubt, it was probably deer meat. Grant stepped up and tried the food himself, but the beast looked absolutely ferocious, like it had no clue what was happening. He let out a shaky breath and admitted, straight to the point, that he was out of food. Suddenly, the goat jerked up and bolted away from him, and the creature surged forward with a hungry lean. The kid was totally baffled. Then the beast's horns started dropping off like they were melting midair. Grant snapped, "Those are coming off?" And he had no clue if that was normal, so he just decided to watch. The hero edged beside the fallen horn. Then the beast snapped its head around like it was hunting for something, and right before it could finish scanning, fresh horns burst up where the others lay as the creature threw open its muzzle. This young fool mistook a goat for the master of the forest, then went wide-eyed at his wild horn's perfect ingredients for potions and amulets. So he thanked the beast like he'd hit jackpot on the way, only to find out it was all just a chamois. After a while, the young man grabbed a hoe and tore into the garden, digging and turning the earth like a mission. Between mixing up potions and hauling them to Kirsch's shop, Gran made sure his own plot stayed alive and growing. He snatched up the needed grains, then buried them in the soil like a promise that had to grow. The protagonist slumped in exhaustion and wiped the sweat off his forehead like it was burning there. Grant leaned into the storage room and gasped at the absolute wreckage, and then he slammed magic down to fix the whole warehouse back up. He had a mountain of work to chew through, but the boy never once sat still. He kept swinging the axe or scrubbing something clean, and that steady, measured life made every chore feel like a win, like it was built perfectly for him. The warehouse gleamed spotless, and he built a smokehouse to craft meat that lasts while the butchered carcass he'd turn into prosciutto sat right there waiting. The protagonist hacked the meat into bite-sized chunks, then massaged them with salt, pepper, a pinch of sugar, and finally chopped herbs, forcing the blood out so it vanished into the fibers. The meat was meant to sit in that curing state for anywhere from 1 day to 2 whole weeks. But he ditched the plan and shoved it into a storage facility to blast the process along. Then he took a hard look at everything going on, yanked the salted meat out, and scrubbed the salt off the surface. Then they dropped the product straight into a barrel of water. When the soaking finally ended, he yanked the meat from the barrel, dried it off, and unleashed his special skill on it. Then, once every last bit of surface moisture vanished, he hung the pieces in the smokehouse and let them smoke for a couple of hours. While the dish hissed and smoked, the guy jumped in and cooked up dinner. He pulled out every ingredient he needed and spread them across the table like a chef ready to cook up chaos. Gran diced the black buffalo tongue into 2-centimeter cubes, then buried the meat in a thick mash of pureed onions only to stop the marinating after about 15 minutes. After just 15 minutes, the meat got tossed into boiling water and snapped into a rapid boil, and once it was cooked through, they hit it with salt and pepper so it could soak up every flavor. Meanwhile, heat the fat in a deep saucepan with garlic oil, and the moment that aroma hits harder, toss in the finely chopped onion and let it simmer on low. Keep stirring until it smooths out. The hero took one deep breath and a mouth-watering aroma flooded the whole kitchen. Grant said that once the onions hit the pan, he tosses in peeled tomatoes. He smashes everything together and keeps the heat cranking once the tomatoes turn soft. He pours in the red wine, brings the whole pot to a roaring boil, and at the same time, the young man swings back to the main course. He tossed those tongue cubes into the pan and seared them until they turned golden, hitting them with salt and pepper. First then, he dumped in the tongue pieces and mushrooms. The lid snapped shut and everything simmered on low while he kept topping it up with water so it wouldn't burn, and the boy couldn't wait for what came next. The scent rolled through the whole house and even drifted beyond the doors. Time dragged on, then the smoker finally hissed with fresh steam, and the hero grinned. He had a feeling it was ready. He couldn't wait, so he tested one leg immediately, then tucked the other into refrigerated storage because he loved hoarding for the long haul. After shutting the warehouse, the boy froze. There was a goat staring right at him. The young man's shock hit hard because he'd already learned the repellent fence won't stop monsters like that. Yet this goat never showed up on any magical intrusion detector at all. Was this really a top-tier monster? The boy's mind raced as the goat slammed its storage skill. Then herbs, rare materials, and fresh vegetables rained down like treasure, hitting the ground in front of the hero. A young man stared in awe at the glowing stuff and blurted out whether the goat would hand it over. And the goat just nodded like, yeah. Grant couldn't tell if it was demanding a trade or if it only wanted a snack. The protagonist swore he wouldn't wipe it all out himself, then decided to whip up more. And just like that, the finished dish landed on the table, filling the air with a mouth-watering aroma. The hero and the goat snatched that treat with pure gratitude. The young man said it was just an everyday goat from where he used to live, and that it was a thank you for life and food. The goat nodded, and then it started to dig in. He dipped his muzzle, took one quick taste, and boom, his eyes went wide. Then he tore into the food like a man possessed, licking the entire bowl clean, absolutely thrilled by how perfectly this dish was made. The boy grinned and told the goat, "I've got more food, pig out as much as you want." So the goat took that chance and tried again. The young man stuffed a piece of meat into his mouth. He trembled as the heat hit his face, then let out a slow breath, one bite, and that carefully braised tongue melted in his mouth, flooding him with rich beef flavor, while the long simmer wiped away the sour bite and let the tomato's sweetness fade into pure depth. Because he skipped both the broth and the brown sauce, the ingredients' real flavors took over the whole meal, so the hero practically blurted, "This is all so good." And the goat didn't even slow down, just kept chewing and asking for more. The young man flashed a grin because even with a monster sitting right beside him, they were actually getting along great at the table. The pot was barely half full, and the boy leaned in to ask the goat if he wanted wine after the meal. Then he swore he'd bring appetizers too, urging him to hang tight for a moment. For the first time, everything looked perfect. He yanked out the meat and set it down, and the real question burned in everyone's heads. What was hiding inside? Then a brand new dish landed on the table. The young man thrust the plate into the goat's hands. Then the goat totally froze, clueless about what was going down, before poking its nose into the plate. Suddenly, the hero's eyes widened, and he finally grasped exactly what the monster wanted. They clinked their glasses, then dove in and started tearing into their food. The young man asked what it tasted like, then snatched a piece for himself right there. Grant took a tiny bite and bam, his eyes shot wide open. He shouted that it was dry-cured meat and that he absolutely loved it. They cracked into the wine and tore into that delicious meat, skewering every bite with a fork and digging in nonstop while the goat kept flinging the meat around and bobbing its horns like it owned the place. The heroes were absolutely thrilled to be together, laughing, cheering, and stuffing their faces like it was the best day ever. Morning burst in, and a mouth-watering aroma spilled from the house inside. The protagonist had eggs sizzling on the stove. Then he cracked his back with a long, satisfying stretch and a nodded little sigh. Suddenly, the young man poured himself a cup of coffee, and right then, the doorbell blared. He figured a guest had arrived, but he couldn't stop wondering who it was. Gran shot back, "Is it a chamois?" And suddenly the whole mess from yesterday flooded his memory. Suddenly, a weird silhouette popped up under his window, and the young man's body went rigid with fear. Then the boy blurted, asking if he could come in, and the protagonist trembled as he stared at the stranger standing there on his threshold. The stranger snapped at him, saying it's cruel to vanish without a word about where you're headed. Then Gran walked up to Abel and demanded to know what he wanted. He said he'd come to eat, but the young man snapped back this wasn't a diner. Abel blurted, "This is exactly why I came," and slammed his magic on. Then a bag materialized in his hands. She crumpled to the ground. The kid crashed onto it and blurted, "What is this?" Abel leaned in and told him it was exactly what he'd been hunting for. Then the bag spilled with rice. The boy stared, stunned, and asked where his friend even got it, and Abel just admitted he hadn't eaten breakfast yet. Gran clutched a mountain of rice in his hands and shook with nerves, then declared that if his comrade had been thinking about breakfast, it was already so. "Come on, sit right down." Abel immediately said he'd take the treat, no hesitation at all. The hero decided to feed his comrade, but first, he had to hunt down where Abel was getting that rice. The adventurers kept eating, trading stories about every mouth-watering dish the protagonist had cooked up. Peace hung in the air inside Grant's house. The Brilliant peppered his friend with a question about that rice. Abel leaned in and said he'd found it in one of the dungeons, and the hero froze, totally thrown off because he couldn't figure out which dungeon he meant. The kid said that the second he cracked open the treasure chest, he hit pay dirt sacks of supplies stacked inside, and every last bit of it was edible, down to that exact white grain Gran had been searching for. Most of what he dug up from that chest was pure ingredients, every scrap tied back to food, even demons that could supposedly be eaten. And the way he stared at it made it obvious he was shocked, so he demanded to know what kind of dungeon this was. His companion leaned in and said, "Up there, they've got spices for days, and salt stacked on the lower tiers." But then he cut in fast. "Getting there is only by sea, you'll need a ship." Gran leaned in and asked if they had a boat they could haul through Ariel's spatial magic. Abel said it was doable, but warned that one hit from those huge monsters could send their ship straight to the bottom. They wanted to build a port, but transportation headaches and brutal costs blew up the whole plan, and the negotiations ground to a halt, so the dungeon stayed put, quietly feeding everyone with those valuable ingredients anyway. Gran froze for a second. Then his eyes widened, because the ingredients weren't just important, they were stacked in massive quantities, and he couldn't believe nobody had ever noticed how huge this place really was. Abel figured this was the price for living off what they got, and that's how they ended up in this mess. Then the hero dropped into his seat, leaned forward, and demanded to know where the dungeon was, only for his comrade to point out it sat near the town of Alta Botanical. They could teleport there in a blink. But the boy shot a question back. Why the rush? He was still thinking they should slow down, settle near his home, and build a proper base first. The thought of a dungeon packed with food hooked Grant's imagination, and the second he was settled in, he vowed to go. Then asked right away if he could buy some rice. Abel's face burned with embarrassment as he forced out a smile, and said the hero vanished while he was away from the capital, and that his comrades kept vanishing in packs for stretches at a time, while the protagonist just grinned and vanished without a word, which Bull thought was downright disgraceful. The comrade snapped that he didn't even know where he'd ended up, and the guy just froze, staring for words that wouldn't come. He froze for a second, then grilled him on how Bell tracked his location, and told him Grant had a backpack with spatial storage he could tap into. The second he handed it over, he was locked. In no way he'd lose it, and he made sure it was always within sight. Grant froze in shock, thinking his buddy had been trailing him in secret. Then the kid snapped back fast, saying, "Relax, I'm not here for trouble. I just want to taste your food." But it was clear there was something bigger behind it. Grant hauled in the rice even though he still couldn't cook a thing with it, and they were doing him a solid. Abel flashed a genuine smile, like he was already dreaming up the first rice dish they'd make together someday. He could teleport here any second, so they snapped back to the food plan, grab some, and bring it with them, load up on fish from the mountain lakes, and yeah, they all agreed it was the smartest move. Abel said he could always magically get himself back home, so staying here for a bit wouldn't be a problem. Then he asked the young man if he had an extra room he could rent, offering a big payout, and the hero just stared, shocked. The next day, the heroes huddled inside a forest house. and Gran suddenly screamed, totally lost, because he had no idea what was going on. Turns out, Abel had quietly swapped things around, and the hero fired back. "Where did you even get all this stuff?" They told Gran that this was all that was left of the band of bandits they'd just crushed, and he was stunned because he'd pulled off everything in a single day. The hero snapped that Gran's house was filthy, so he blasted it with a cleansing spell and then slammed on an anti-degradation spell too. The boy thanked him, but his worry hit anyway. That must have been brutal. The hero just told him, "Feed me, and you'll thank me, right?" Gran wasn't against it, but he said, "I need time to cook the rice," and the hero shot back, "So, how are you even planning to make it?" The guy leaned in and told him he wasn't about to cook like normal. This was a whole different way of working with water. The hero leaned in and asked if they were really planning to do one of those wild fornications he always bragged about. Gran said he'd learned them from a merchant who'd looked after him, and then the boy demanded to know where that merchant came from. Turns out he'd come from the East originally, but I never saw him again. So nobody could swear to the truth. Gran knew he couldn't tell his friend any of the memories from his past life. Then the hero fired up the kitchen and started cooking the rice, ready for whatever came next. She told herself, "All right, now I'm cooking with rice." He blurted out the recipe right away, insisting that first he'd scrub the rice until it was spotless, then grind it for a full hour. He couldn't help but think, "Man, I love working with rice." With one hand, the guy grabbed the rice bowl and scrubbed every grain clean, over and over. After that, he chugged every last drop of water dry. He leaned in again and poured fresh water into the bowl of rice. Now he had to dunk it in water and scrub it until it was spotless. So he yanked out the control console, tapped through the options, and when he spotted that big boar meat setting, he figured everything would be properly ground up. He grabbed the pot and muttered to himself that he'd already cooked tonkatsu for the group several times. Every single time, Abel absolutely loved it. Then tossed the rice in and let it cook. He chopped up pork tenderloin, onions, and Japanese parsley, then mixed in okara, wheat flour, oyster sauce, and eggs until the whole recipe came alive. He chopped the onion into razor-thin slices as the kelp broth simmered, and that's when the hero fired up the oil. While the cooking simmered, the hero leaned in and admitted talking about his past life that he knew the exact seaweed that would make the broth perfect. Gran started with shoulder meat, then hit it with a heavy pinch of salt and pepper to make it sing. Then I coated the meat first in flour, next in egg, and finally right through the breadcrumbs. He drove the meat straight through and dropped it into the hot oil. The moment the food hit the air, a mouth-watering smell stormed into the kitchen. A timer started ringing on his right, like a countdown screaming for action. The rice is already cooked, so crank the heat up and get it sizzling hot. The hero couldn't believe it. The sweet aroma of warm rice mixed with the mouth-watering juiciness of fried meat was just irresistible. The moment the meat turned golden, the hero yanked every last drop of oil out. "Now, go on, take the challenge and give it a shot." But even as he hacked through the meat, he told himself, "I'll wait, patience is the move." Next, he dumped broth, soy sauce, sugar, and sake into the pan and let it all sizzle together. Now toss in the onion and let it cook until it's bursting with flavor. Once the onion turns soft and sweet, toss in the tonkatsu, then crack in the egg and watch it all come together. Now slam on the lid and cook it for 30 seconds. Then the hero went to check on the rice and see if it was coming along. The delicious smell of rice hit him so hard his mouth started watering instantly. He knew it wouldn't feel the same without Donbury, and that meant he'd have to handle everything alone. Then, out of nowhere, a guy walked straight into his kitchen. Grant told him everything was almost ready then. His comrade said he'd stepped out for a walk to build an appetite and had only just come back. The hero declared, "All right, dinner's on. Let's eat." He plopped the dish on the table and said it was tonkatsu with rice at the bottom. "It's called kotsudan." Then leaned in like, "Try it, you've gotta." Abel shot back that he wouldn't even bother asking. Grain said the katsudan egg and rice piled together looked seriously promising. And sure enough, he found it way easier to eat once he just held the bowl in his hands. His friend just kept repeating every word after him like he couldn't let it go. Then, he finally took his first bite of the dish, tasting it for the very first time. Abel dug into the meat and howled with pure delight, calling it delicious. Then Grant snapped, saying talking was off limits while he ate. It was his first bite of something like this, and the flavor hit him as totally unfamiliar, yet it was so damn good he couldn't get enough. Abel said soy sauce and just a touch of sweetness hit perfectly together. Gran stared at the mage ahead of him, pride blazing in his eyes. Then he took a bite of his dish and grinned, savoring every last delicious flavor. The hero couldn't help but think tonkatsu's deep, savory flavor mixed with that sweet, tender rice. It was a perfect match. The hero realized fried food is already amazing on its own, but once you toss it with rice, the flavor explodes and hits like pure magic. Abel took one bite of the sauce and frowned. Its flavor felt totally off, like nothing he'd ever tasted before. Then Grant shot back that it was soy sauce from some far-off foreign country. The hero claimed he stumbled on it by accident in the camp, but admitted he knows almost nothing about it, only that this sauce is supposedly from some far-off eastern country. Abel couldn't stop thinking about the eastern country, and the hero quietly told himself it was safer to let his comrades wonder about it on their own. Then he grinned and warned, "There's barely any of this sauce left, so do me a favor and grab at least a little more." Right then, Abel shot up from the table and demanded where that sauce from the country east of Cylinder came from. Gran just smirked and said it was obvious, because the rice was from there too. If they could just get a steady stash of rice and soy sauce, they'd crank out way more food fast. Steak alone gets made from rice and soybeans, which means they could totally remix their menu. Abel couldn't believe it and demanded, "How is that even possible?" The hero said it all came down to using the same ingredients, but cooking them in totally different ways. New seasonings, new methods. While Abel couldn't stop thinking that the country had to be in the east, Gran then chimed in that Obolo folks told him they'd gotten it from a merchant ship that docked here, hauling it in from overseas. The magician shot back that Obolo is the eastern slice of Yandere. So if they're really talking about delivering sauce and rice, then teleportation magic can just beam it halfway there. He practically bounced and asked if there was enough tofu, rice, and miso, because they could whip up a ton of different dishes from that. Gran nodded and said, yeah, he'd have everything they needed. Abel said with total confidence, "I'll get there," even though deep down he knew it probably wouldn't happen anytime soon. Gran leaned in and told him, "I believe in you right now. I truly do." Then the magician leaned in and demanded to know whether the hero truly understood what he'd asked for in return for the delivery. But the hero didn't crack. He kept his cool and promised he'd cook the best food for both of them. He figured this was plenty for now. After all, he had a friend with magic so unreal it felt like cheating. The hero declared that slaughtering carcasses was his true calling. He grabbed a blade and started slicing into the meat of one of the animals. Granix barked, "Sure, Grinlick looks small, but you'd still need half a day to butcher him. Sounds easy on paper, doesn't it?" So yeah, Albert slid him those materials instead of paying rent or bringing food. Right ahead of him lay the wreckage of the fatal bird, the black buffalo, and like the universe was showing off Greenlake. The hero hauled all the materials to the warehouse by himself, then shot Abel a question, like, "Do you really think this is a walk in the park?" She told him straight up this place wasn't even close to the nearest town. Abel stood at the foot of the eastern mountain, and while she'd come to hunt black buffalo, Greenlake showed up out of nowhere. Grant snapped that it wasn't even a real walking route, but the girl insisted she'd been there before then, said she could teleport. She tossed everything else aside and chose Grant. He claimed she was too loose, but before he could blink, she was already gone. Because of these supplies, they'll score the best meat around. He struggled to chop the meat hour after hour, and by the time he finally got through, the sky had already swallowed the daylight. That dragon breed was ruthless in the best way. Every single part mattered, from blood and entrails brewed into top-tier potions to horns and even scales, forged into armor and accessories. And the magic stone? Enormous. Even the meat wasn't trash, it was edible. Grand figured that with that much meat on hand, they could cook up a whole feast dish after dish, product after product. The heroes kicked off a brand new journey, and the road ahead was about to go wild. The very next day, Gran was locked in on cartography, because that's exactly what an adventurer's supposed to do, marking the key resource spots and the monster hideouts too. This makes the search hit harder and steers you clear of dangerous spots. Because Gran had the search skill, he could read the land at a glance, so mapping was effortless for him. But the forest was so massive, it swallowed his sense of direction. He figured the maps were probably being sold at the Adventures Guild in Amona only, for areas that had already been explored. While hunting answers for his research, Gran snatched up every herb he could find, and then he took in the wild beauty of nature like it was calling him closer. With monsters prowling nearby, he grits his teeth and draws his own map. At last, he stumbled back to the exact spot where he'd seen that unicorn the last time. Gran spent ages drawing it out, but if you just head straight, you'll reach it in about an hour and a half plus. He said the spot is perfect for setting up a base camp. The hero pinned this spot on the map, already betting he'd need to come back here when the moment hit. Then he decided to push deeper into the forest. Gran couldn't help but wonder if monsters were lurking in that forest, hiding valuables, and maybe even rare herbs. So he swaggered deeper, and it was a mistake he'd pay for later. Suddenly, a spine-chilling howl tore through the forest. He snapped into action and leaped backward just as whatever was attacking him lunged at the spot where he'd been standing. A massive monster reared up in front of them, glaring at the hero with pure hostile fury. The adventurer snapped into action, expertly blocking every vicious blow the monsters threw at him. With every slice, the hero carved off the predator's parts. He watched another one sprout instantly in its place. It was a Veloci Trenta monster that looked just like a tree, and the hero knew the saying, if you want to hide a Trent, you hide it in the forest. These creatures are absolute ninjas at disappearing, and the second you finally clock the monster nearby, you're already getting buried under a rampaging horde of Trents. Now Gran finds himself right in this exact mess trapped in thick, untamed forests, where adventurers barely ever dared to step foot. Temptation hit him hard because these medicinal herbs were growing like crazy, so he wandered in without a second thought. Gran flat out said that, one-on-one, Trent Velox just isn't that big of a threat. But once an adventurer gets swamped by sheer numbers, even the toughest soul starts to buckle and feel drained. More monsters crashed into their crew, joining in one after another. He swore he'd hunt them all down and end every last one. But there was no way he could pull it off solo, so the only smart move was to bolt. As he turned away, a blinding beam of light slammed into view ahead. Gran tore through the bushes. Eventually, the truth hit him: he was completely lost. Even though he just came out to speak, it instantly clicked. Now he finally understood where he was. Gran scrambled up a tree and carved out the perfect view of the entire forest, and when he looked around, it blew up even bigger than he'd ever imagined. He spotted a city in the distance, and the adventurer's mind instantly clicked: if he rode the current downstream, he'd reach it. So yeah, upstream, the forest just keeps swallowing itself deeper and deeper. He couldn't shake the feeling there had to be a hill or a real forest there, because what he was seeing looked way too massive to be a simple grove. And the deeper he pushed in, the thicker and more intimidating the trees got. The thicket felt like it was ready to snap at anyone who dared step inside, because this was true untamed wilderness, a place where no human had ever set foot. Gran sprang off the tree like a streak of lightning. Out of nowhere, he spotted something right ahead. From behind the bushes, a cute little animal popped out and reached for him, leaving the hero shocked that it actually lived there. He leaned in and demanded he show him the way. He made a deal: promise me he'll bring the animal dinner. The hero made it back to his home, and right there waiting was Abel, greeting him like it was already part of the plan. She admitted the monster fence didn't hold, so she doubled down and reinforced it to stop the bigger beasts. And ever since she'd raised that intruder barrier, only she and Gran could get in unless someone dared to unlock it. The moment Abel spotted the animal in front of her, he froze. Because if he could be a monster, why couldn't it slip in too, right as she hardened her defenses? Then Gran cut in that he'd come along to grab something delicious. Abel couldn't believe. He was sure the hero was about to team up with that monster. The hero shot back that he lived by himself, and even admitted the monster could carry a conversation, and Abel instantly clocked it. This guy was painfully, insanely lonely. The adventurer shot the room, a warning he was about to start cooking dinner, and everyone had to wait. Abel and the monster faced each other in dead still silence, like the air itself was holding its breath. For today's menu, Grant decided to dive straight into green lake meat. All the other ingredients were already lined up: cabbage, green lane meat, garlic, venison, butter, and more so, they could whip the whole dish together in a flash. First, you boil the cabbage until it turns soft, then peel it into leaves and let the water drain out. Meanwhile, you finely chop the onion, fry it in melted butter until it goes glassy and translucent, and then cool it down. At the same time, the hero is going to grind Green Lake's dragon meat into fine minced goodness, because dragon meat is usually so lean and packed solid. If he only used that green lake meat, it would have turned way too heavy. So he tossed in about a third of meat from a regular meat-producing animal and mixed it all until it was perfectly blended. Then he tossed in fried onions, cracked an egg, stirred in breadcrumbs, dusted a little pepper, salt, and nutmeg, and whipped the whole mix together in the bowl again. He split the minced meat into portions and rolled each one into tight little balls. Gran realized he was handling everything like a pro, and it was even easier to get his eating done. Next, the hero stuffed the minced meat into soft cabbage leaves, tied them up with strips of bacon, and stared at the pot like it was a life or death choice. Gran wrestled for ages over veggie broth or meat broth, then picked vegetable broth since he already had cabbage and onion scraps to spare. All he could do was simmer the whole thing down and hit it with pepper and salt. Grant blared, "Dinner's ready," and told Abel to jump in and help him haul out the dish. The hero decided to ditch the house dinner and eat outside because their forest guests simply wouldn't fit inside. As soon as the table was set, Grant stormed in with the dish and served it to the guests like a grand reveal. He cranked out Darko's cabbage rolls and poured wine alongside them, and when Abel took a whiff, he lit up and demanded to know, were they actually vegetables? Green Lake meat and cabbage leaves? The hero said, betting Abel would love it. Then the grower snapped back that Gran never had a bad meal. The heroes dove into their meal. Grant tore off a chunk of cabbage roll and savored the rich aroma, thinking the juices and scent were practically bursting at the seams. Finally, he shoved the very first bite into his mouth. He couldn't stop smiling. He absolutely loved the dish he cooked with his own hands. He swore it tasted delicious, this rich dragon flavor exploding in his face, even though it was minced meat. You could still feel the meat there, dense and heavy, until the scent slammed into his nose like a full-on tsunami of meat. And with just a little meat from that meat beast, it never gets dull, you could eat it forever. Then he wondered, what if I swap it for pure dragon meat? So he scribbled it down because later he swore he'd cook only that. The forest friend devoured every bite and, before the meal even cooled, Gran decided to bring him even more. Abel couldn't stop smiling at just how insanely incredible this dish tasted. She figured he'd wrapped the meat in veggies to trap every drop of juice and said the first bite when the flavor melts away inside her was straight up mind-blowing. And when that broth meets the fresh, lightly sweet juice flowing into it, the flavor hits with crazy depth. Once you start, you can't stop. Abel let out a desperate scream, begging for more. She quickly realized the forest monster had one hunger-stuffing itself, greedy for every last bite. Grant backed him up and said it was all fine anyway, like none of it even mattered. Then the girl said, if Grant is good with it all, I'm good with it too. The beast demanded more. Then she made it crystal clear this wasn't happening anytime soon. But once she wraps up her current job, she starts plotting to head east of Sorande, just like Grant told her. The hero practically exploded with joy at the news. Then she said she could teleport straight to any city she'd already seen. But after that, she'd still have to ride horseback or trek through the train station, meaning reaching the outskirts would take forever. The country sprawls so hard that even a stagecoach would chew up nearly a month to reach the farthest corners, yet she's never gone there. So it's basically a perfect excuse to add more names to her teleportation list. Gran shot back, of course I'll pay you every last bit, no delays. For her, getting paid meant one thing, real food, real shelter. And if he struck lucky with quality materials, he could craft her top-tier gear. But the hero confessed he'd been scribbling notes and, as a hobbit, no one expected him to pull off anything legendary. Then the girl hit him with a question. Could he enchant items? Turns out it all comes down to the material, because he can't enchant gear that drops from high-level dungeons. Soon Sarandal couldn't resist either. She was itching to dive into the local cuisine of this region. Even though the hero never leans on anyone, he's suddenly closing in on rice fast. Right then, the forest beast demanded even more food, and Abel shot it down, claiming it was already eating way too much. Fresh from his past life, Gran's mind snapped back to the taste of black coffee, because even if he was stuck in a whole new world, that morning cup was non-negotiable. Every morning before anything that mattered, he always hit that first cup of coffee like a ritual that fired him up. The moment he takes a sip of coffee, everything clicks, his thoughts sharpen, his energy surges, and he's ready to charge into the next job. As a kid, he couldn't fathom how anyone could choke down that bitter stuff. Then somewhere along the way, he grew up and was drinking it himself. No clue when the change happened. and slowly, that flavor got tattooed on my taste buds, so everything started to hit the same. He remembers it like a punch to the gut mornings, sure, but also all the time between work breaks. And then he downed a fresh cup of coffee. At first, he dumped in sugar and milk, but day by day, he started cutting back until he finally took his coffee straight pure, bitter, and exactly how he wanted to taste it. Grant won't deny the strength hits like an addiction. But this local coffee only looks the part. The flavor is totally different, yet somehow it still drags him back to his usual cup. He took a quick sip of his drink, and Abel leaned in to ask, "So you're drinking herbal tea?" He took one look at the drink and the color hit like a punch. Insanely intense. Grant swore it was real tea. Then he poured the proof, boiling the roots of the popo sprouts himself. The hero confessed that the moment he drinks this tea, his head snaps clear like a gentle jolt of energy that steadies his body and brings his strength roaring back. And if he sips it in the morning, that sleepy fog instantly vanishes. Abel leaned in and demanded whether he was using that yellow popo flower that grows everywhere to brew the drink. The guy told him it was a flower that could grow anywhere, but it carried just a pinch of magic, enough to turn into powerful potions. Abel admitted it was the first time he'd ever heard that popo flower could even be used to make potions. Then the adventurer shoved the drink into his hands and dared him to taste it, even though it hit his tongue with a sharp, bitter sting. The magician hated that drink so much it made his face twist instantly, and somehow, that drink tasted like straight-up dirt. He stared in shock as the hero swallowed it without a twitch, total calm in the middle of the chaos. He shot back that it was nothing more than pure habit. He said it was way easier to drink once he mixed in milk and sugar. Then he went on to suggest adding the powder and tasting it. Even though the magician loved the new flavor, the drink still hit him with that brutal bitterness. So the hero shrugged and said the flower itself was just painfully bitter, while the girl guessed that exact sharp taste was what kept him feeling so fresh. The magician leaned in and demanded, "So how did you even get the crazy idea to turn it into tea? So could they really turn this drink into a potion that restores strength?" Granny Amu said he'd wrestled with the same idea before, so he rolled up his sleeves and brewed something close. Silver became the catalyst, and boom, the body surged back to life with a restoring force. That effect kills the fatigue for a little while, but when it fades, apathy crashes in, and because he used silver, pushing it too often can bring toxic side effects. Abel snapped back that it was a dumb idea to brew anything like that from a weed that grows in every corner, then warned that if they glossed over the downsides, they could probably sell it as a body-enhancing potion. Grant knew it was risky, so he finally blurted it out for the first time because nobody ever thinks to turn a popo flower into a potion. Abel never in a million years would have guessed that a plain, everyday plant could turn into a doping weapon. The adventurer leaned in and told us that potion ingredients are usually hiding close by. Without Gran, everyday life turns bland and even the food loses its spark. Breakfast was done, and Abel headed out to deliver the order the capital's Magus Guild had sent. He dashed off with grand plans, sticking to his daily grind, scouring for materials to brew potions. Before anything else, the hero devours every last cookie so he'll have a sweet bite to go with his coffee brewed from the popo flower's roots. He whipped up the whole batter with butter, sugar, an egg, and flour. First, he smashed the softened butter until it turned creamy. Then he poured in the sugar and kept beating it until the mix came together smooth and turned a bright yellow. Then he tosses in the yolks and whips the entire dough back together. He raises the flour to his lips and sips its magic as he adds it. Then he kneaded the dough with total focus, pressing and folding it until it felt just right. Once the flour disappears into the dough, he folds it over, then starts kneading hard. Paul slips it away to rest in storage. While the dough chills and rises, Gran fires up the oven then. After a full 30 minutes, he finally pulls the dough out. He flattens the dough on the board, then cuts it into neat, even pieces ready to become something amazing. Then he shoves the tray of dough into a preheated brick oven, where the bricks trap the heat and a blazing magic stone keeps it roaring. Gran slid the cookies into the oven and let them bake for 15 minutes. Fresh out of the oven, the cookies looked way too ordinary to be trusted. But then the hero snaps. He realizes he totally forgot to add one crucial thing. While he went out to collect popo roots like always, he stumbled on this, and the moment he grabbed them, he packed everything away right then. Then he spotted a solid stash of berries he'd picked in the forest, and his stomach practically demanded jam, so he made it. Now he stirred in the jam, and those cookies were finally ready to steal the spotlight. Gran baked a batch of butter cookies and drowned them in wild berry syrup, and the whole place smelled like pure comfort. The adventurer realized that a little jam on top instantly made the cookies pop, and he couldn't help it. He finally dug into the finished dessert. Gran grinned, totally satisfied with the dish he'd just served. Those cookies hit sweet and the jam snapped back with tart flavor take. Either away and the whole taste falls apart. He figured if he was only making Popo's coffee biscuits, they'd taste better sweeter, so he whipped up another batch for him, then pushed it aside for later, because right now, he was dead set on sticking to his daily plans. Today he strapped in and set off to hunt monsters and snag fresh herbs just a bit farther from the lake. Right behind his house, there was a full-on treasure trove waiting like pure gold. So far, he hasn't run into a single truly brutal monster. He hauled the defeated monster carcasses to storage. The hero felt his shoulders finally loosen as he strolled through this weirdly quiet stretch, like the world had stopped to hold its breath. The second the thought hit him, he toppled straight into the hole without even a second to react. Grant couldn't shake the feeling that this place was some kind of monster's nest, but there wasn't a single soul in sight. And when the magic came up flimsy, it just didn't feel like the kind of power you'd find in a dungeon. Up to now, he hadn't felt a single real monster presence anywhere. Then Gran cracked on and pushed deeper into the cave, eager to scope the place out. First, he yanked something from his backpack. Yeah, that snack was calling his name. The hero stared in shock, because the dish didn't spill a single drop. He tore into a sandwich with his very first bite. Then, right at that instant, he felt eyes locked on him. No anger, just attention. He told the monsters in front of him he wasn't here to fight or wreck their territory. He only wanted to dig around the cave and slip away. In the dark cave, those tiny creatures stared at Gran like she was the coolest mystery they'd ever seen. Sandwich's legend totally hooked the hero. The hero caught on fast and told them straight up, "I've got nothing but fruits, veggies, and meat trade with me for a stone." These were Molly Beastmen Molly, being the name for animals that live underground, and one of those creatures blurted out that it was craving something tasty to eat. They're lightning-fast underground geniuses, turning mind ore into magical materials with insane skill. Then Gran hits them with the sweetest peace offering, cookies he just baked for the molas. One animal leaned in and stared hard at the object right in front of it. Then he tore into the cookie with one greedy bite. Its flavor hit so good that the animal lit up with pure joy. Then the moles all around the hero surged closer, pressing in like, "Let us try." Gran shoved the whole stash of cookies into his forest friend's hands and made sure every last one got shared. He straight up asked if they'd mind him hauling supplies down from the surface every so often, and then he sweetened the deal, trade him ore or magical plants, and the hero would use whatever he could to fulfill their requests. The beast handed the adventurer a stone as a reward right for that cookie. Yeah, Gran snatched him before he could even slip away. He leaned into the control console and scanned the stone, trying to figure out exactly what it was. The hero snapped that paying up with this stone would be way too much. But he handed them some pepper and shot them a warning if they opened it. Instant sneezes were coming. The beast's eyes widened in shock. This adventurer was handing it pepper, and that stuff cost a fortune. Gran snapped that it was pricey until you trek far enough. Then you can snag it for way less. While he was at it, he stocked up on pepper in bulk, leaving him with plenty to spare, and the hero thought, yeah, this is exactly what we need. He declared he'd need stones and gems for enchanting, and he was pushing hard to strike regular deals with them like clockwork. The animals locked arms and agreed to the deal. Gran warned me, saying he'd face-planted into a hole and wound up here by accident, so he hadn't brought a single thing special with him. Next time, he'll show up with something new because they struck a deal with him and swore they'd bring ore too. Then the hero stepped up and introduced himself as a legendary man who lived right at the tree line, up in the hills beyond the forest. The beast swept in and proudly introduced himself, Luba Mo. The adventurer thrust his hand forward, promising gratitude for his help, and Moe grabbed it. Then the animals marched alongside the hero, pushing him out into the open air. Back on Earth, Gran figured it was finally time to move. Then he stared into the pit again, realizing that if he jumped in before toughening his body, he could straight up die. Suddenly, something grabbed at his clothes. But then, Gourmet was his forest friend all along, and Grant flipped out, yelling that he'd scared him. He couldn't ignore it. Shimoa always slipped in without a sound, like it had zero presence at all. The adventurer stared at it and swore this couldn't be natural for a single second. He told Shimoa, "I won't spill a word about the Moli settlements or the forest depths so no one comes crawling in here. We tread with the Moli only now and then." He added that maybe only someone like that could explain it. But honestly, he told him not to stress about it. Right then, the Shimoa slammed its hoof into the ground. Gran could tell Shimoa wasn't just roaming, it was the forest's master. The hero didn't feel hostility from it, but he got the message. This forest friend would never let strangers rush in and wreck the place. They even chose those spots for a reason, or veins were likely buried there. If people dug them up, the poor Poles would be forced out of their homes for good. The beast stalked the hero deeper and deeper into the heart of the forest. Gran refuses to stir up conflict with the other races, so he plays it smart, trades peacefully, and walks away with the materials he needs. Races for him feel like a grind he can't stand. He just wants a slow, peaceful life, free from all that exhausting obligation. After that, Grant leaned into his forest buddy and promised, "I'm heading home to cook up something good," then invited him over to his place. Grant blinked in shock. Abel was coming with him, even though Abel only planned to deliver the potions. The magician honestly wanted to see the hero trade blows, but the adventurer refused to let Abel and Alicia ever cross paths. With a high-level mage on your side, you don't even run, you just teleport. They blinked, and in the blink, they were suddenly standing in the square. Grant showed up and told Alicia what he brought this week, smiling, already claiming the spotlight. The boy and girl greeted him, and Alicia thanked him for stopping by last week like it actually meant something. But when the hero turned away, the girl spotted someone else and blurted out, "Who are you?" Grant told him his roommate wouldn't take no for an answer and hauled him along, then introduced his new fellow adventurer, Abel. He personally marched the mage into the Sorrow shop, the place that supplies elder sister Alicia and the younger Kirsha. Abel lit up and told them he was absolutely thrilled to finally meet them. The girls froze, staring straight at the Shimola. Grant uncorked his go-to healing, refreshing, and poison potions like a lifesaver lining up for battle. And then he whipped up a brand new vigor potion, an ointment that melts muscle fatigue, and a stronger refreshment brew that not only restores your strength, it also shuts down drowsiness. Alicia snatched up one of the new products, and she told me straight up that Granaissance potions were blowing everyone away because they hit with insane effectiveness. Grant mentally clocked that he was into Alicia. He told her it was just a sample potion, something she could try, then promised that the hand ointment would soothe her dry, cracked hands and help with the rest of her nasty problems too. The girl grabbed the hero's hands and blurted out her thanks, like it was the only thing that mattered. She sniffed the ointment and blinked, sweet as a dessert. Way too good for medicine, and Gran grinned, admitting he'd tossed in lavender flowers to make it smell amazing. He brewed it from lavender essential oil, so it should hit you with that instant aroma therapy glow. The hero even pulled out distilled water pressed from lavender and swore it could work wonders on skin. Alicia pushed again, asking if water could really work for skincare, and the adventurer admitted that girls usually eat that kind of stuff up, so he decided to whip up something just like it for her. He told her this water locks in moisture, so she should use it right after washing, and when the girl nodded, she thanked him again, then promised she'd try it that very day. Abel shot him a question he'd never heard of it and begged the hero to explain, because Gran definitely didn't expect his partner to care this much about skincare too. The magician confessed, "If there's something new to test, I'm all in, so yeah. That hand ointment has his full attention." Gran promised that the moment they got home, she'd whip up another ointment just for him. Abel got thrown off for just a second, then Kirsha snapped back to what Gran had asked her earlier, because that guy had promised it'd be crazy useful. She grinned and said, "All right, I'm heading to the warehouse, get ready, I'm bringing back something big." But the hero looked straight at the challenge, knew it'd be rough for her, and jumped in offering his help without a second thought. But the girl beamed and told him that the ring the grandson gave her made lifting loads feel effortless, and she honestly loved every second of getting physical. Alicia told Kirsha that as soon as he was gone, she'd hand him the money for the potions. The girl yanked out her calculation tool. Abel's jaw dropped when he saw it, because it was the first time he'd ever witnessed anything like that, and he blurted out, "People really use stuff like this?" It was a calculator tool shipped in from other countries, but the grandson built one just for them, and she swore it was incredibly convenient, blazing faster for keeping track of every number. Abel snapped his head toward Grant. The hero mumbled an awkward answer, saying he'd only spotted Eastern traders using the same device and straight up copied it so. Yeah, it wasn't his invention at all. Abel demanded he make him that kind of tool and show him how to use it. Then the hero shot back. Why do you need it if you're not even a merchant? Grand bragged that he could count fast, even without any tools. But the magician shot back that the moment he spots something new, he instantly craves it for himself. And if it makes the math easier, it'll help the officials too. Kersha came sprinting in, clutching the roll and blurting out apologies for how heavy it was. Then someone shouted, "Hey, Gran!" The very next day, she was already rushing through the market like she owned the place. Grand leaned into a table packed with enchanted trinkets and glittering accessories, like the room was brimming with magic waiting to be touched. Abel told him these weren't accessories anymore. They were full-blown magical devices, and when the potions got handed over, the mage somehow stuck close, shadowing the hero as he went. An adventurer pal pointed at this pipe that dripped non-stop only cold water, no less than. Grant just grinned, saying he'd slapped on a water magic stone and wrapped it in thermal insulation magic. Then Abel leaned in and asked about that color-shifting hairpin, insisting he pegged it as nothing but spy gear. Grant figured the local fashion crowd would love it so. He even cooked up a brooch that sharpens a woman's silhouette and makes her look slimmer. Abel didn't buy it for a second, then he demanded to know why he'd even come up with this brooch. The hero just can't stop worrying about all the women who want to look better. Abel begged the man to make him the exact same brooch, but the guy just stared back like, "Why do you even need that?" The magician swore that if he landed the right buyer in the capital, he'd rake in a fortune, and once he had it, he could flip it straight to the jewelry stores the nobility shopped at. Grand convinced himself his partner was judging him, so he started doing tiny little favors for regular folks to prove he mattered. Abel shot back that those accessories would pull straight in merchants the second noblewomen caught on, and before Grand got snatched by them, Abel planned to slip him into a huge, dependable guild, plus, if the bargaining got messy, the mage would handle it all himself. He asked the hero whether he registers every invention with the trade guild when he makes it, but his roommate just shook his head. He knows the hero always delays it because it's a total hassle. And get this, Gran also churns out weird magical contraptions no one can explain. Abel figured he'd need to be hauled straight to the Magical Instruments Guild too, so the mage teleported him, and this time they'd hit the Merchant Guild on the way. Then Gran snapped in. "Hold up, there isn't any Magical Instruments Guild in Eamon." Abel grinned in a way that felt way too creepy. Then Gran finally got what his roommate was talking about. So he nodded, let him teleport him straight to the capital, and made sure everything was registered the right way. The heroes charged for the capital, then Abel shouted, "Gran!" Turns out some clients showed up to see them, and the hero didn't even clock them at first. He greeted them politely, then one of the girls spotted a color-changing hair clip and lit up, so he offered to let her try the blonde one first, or swap it for whatever color she wanted. She asked right there if she could try it on. Gran didn't hesitate. She let her try the magic item on with zero trouble. The girl snatched a hairpin midair and snapped it into her hair. In the blink of an eye, her hair snapped into a new color. Then she demanded, "Is that hairpin really worth 2 huge silver coins?" And when he nodded yes, she grumbled that it sounded way too pricey. Grant told her, "When the magic fades and that golden color slips away, just refill the supply and keep going." Then he leaned in and asked, "So are you happy with the gold?" The girl handed over the coins, and he quickly slipped her a small gift in return. The hero slid her the skin-smoothing lotion in her hands, then made up his mind to drop it off at Passero's shop before he disappeared. He told her that if she liked the lotion, he'd be truly grateful. Then the girl lit up, hugged the gift close, and thanked him with all her heart. And get this, another girl also chased after a hair clip that could flip her hair's color on command. Gran leaned in and asked what hair color she wanted. And he grinned. "Strawberry blonde, that's what you're gonna love." Then the guy grinned and said, "Yeah, I've got this." And with a quick little bit of magic, he sparked it into working on the hairpin. Then he leaned in and begged her to try the color on. She was absolutely thrilled with her new look and demanded to know if she really had to fork over 2 huge silver coins for it too. Gran confirmed it was true, then offered her the exact same gift he'd given the last girl. He nodded his final goodbye to the customer, then caught the girl nearby still staring and spying on the grand stall. The capital's market was packed, every street corner was crammed with people. The hero snapped, sharp as a whip, asking if Abel was busy. The mage snapped back that he had nowhere else to go, and Gran was so locked into his work that he didn't notice a thing, while Abel stood right behind the counter. Then the hero said he'd been a huge help, and if the mage started getting hungry, he could grab food straight from the refrigerator. His roommate blurted, "You want to eat yourself?" Gran shot back, "Nah, I've still got a little left to finish." Abel blurted out the question he'd been dying to ask for ages: how in the world did that adventurer pour so much enchantment into a tiny silver trinket? Gran shrugged and said, like always, that he was busy casting his enchantments. The mage refused to believe. It raised his silver coin, and Mithril would shoot up. He figured no way casting that many spells onto a single chunk of Mithril that big could keep it looking normal, because the base would have to crumble under the strain. Then Gran snapped back. He'd tucked real gold into the hairpin, and the back held a tiny bead of missile liquid, letting it pull off a fancier enchantment than plain silver could ever manage. Abel just stared, baffled by what missile the hero even meant. Gran tried to snap in and correct his partner, but a girl suddenly slid up to their table and claimed he was the one. She muttered under her breath, cheeks burning, too embarrassed to say a word. The girl clenched her resolve and demanded, "Show me this brooch." Abel shot down Gran for not getting women's feelings and said they were too scared to come up to a man and ask for the brooch. So Abel just threw a camouflage spell, and it slid right off everyone's memory except for him and the girl. Unless someone was hunting for it on purpose, the girl thanked the mage. Gran swallowed her embarrassment, apologized for missing those details, and asked the girl to try on the brooch. She agreed on the spot. The second she slipped on the magical item, her whole look snapped into place, and she didn't waste a second before deciding to buy the brooch. The girl gratefully thanked Gran from the bottom of her heart. She told him 4 huge silver coins with that same effect were downright cheap, and as a real apology for his lapse in attention, the hero chose to hand her a gift. But the customer couldn't make sense of what he was actually handing her. Gran leaned in and asked for permission to hold her hand. She nodded and agreed. He grabbed that bottle, painted her nails with it, and she lit up at the hero's crazy idea, so he told her to use the potion, and if the color ever got boring, she'd just wipe it off and paint it again. The guy told her he'd be back selling at the next 5-day market, then pulled her in close just to hear her feelings, so she promised she'd absolutely show up. And once she walked out, Grant grinned and said, "That girl is honestly super nice." The hero swore he was helping women live better lives by fixing their so-called flaws. Then Abel snapped in, reminding him about Liquid Mistle and the Merchant Guild, and Gran's mood instantly plummeted. Kershey rolled up to their kiosk, asked how they were doing, and Gran told her, smiling hard, that because of them, they were practically sold out. She stared at the magical objects spread across the table, and with that grand-sounding confidence in her voice, she said there was no way it could be anything else. Then her eyes snapped to a pair of intriguing bracelets. The hero nodded and said he could do it right then once he heard what the client wanted, though he could only pull off basic protective spells. Kershey leaned in and asked what protective spells even did, and the hero fired back with a bold example: light shadow. He figured girls were into friendship bracelets, but she couldn't help herself. She was dying to learn how to cast spells right in front of a client, even though she barely knew how casting effects worked. Kershey snapped that she was just an ignorant merchant, but Gran shot back, saying anyone who's never faced the weird stuff in the first place won't learn a thing. So she figured, if I'm going to team up with Gran Sam, I'd better study casting spells and understand exactly what they do. She leaned in and demanded to know what kind of effect that bauble would pull off in that exact situation. The hero urged everyone to safeguard themselves from poison. He pitched a remedy that wipes out mild poisons like food poisoning, brushing against poisonous grass, or getting bitten by an insect, and he's sure the kind of toxic stuff people swallow or brush off happens way more often than you'd think. Kershey pressed, "Is it really worth 1 silver coin?" Grant shrugged it off, stitched it with plain embroidery thread, just a pinch of aquatic spider silk, so the materials barely cost anything, and he didn't use a single magic stone. He warned it'll hit hard for about 2 or 3 uses, then it fades away, because it's basically just a throwaway little bauble. This common protective gear is easy to make from stuff you can find anywhere. Then Kershey snapped for some reason, and Abel stared at the hero like, what the heck just happened? The girl suddenly screamed that he had to set a fair, decent price because it's the only way to show real appreciation and respect for the creator. She leaned in and asked what poison that bracelet could block, and Gran snapped back that among the local monsters, it could only stand up to a glass fiber's venom or a venomous spider's bite-perfect protection for a scaly tail's venom. Kershey kept yelling through the market, "If any of those animals bite you, you could die." And then he pounded the bracelet like proof that it truly protected you, and the hero nodded and confirmed it. Turns out this little piece of gear can stop it before it even starts. And it's tiny too, just one measly silver coin. Gran had no clue what was happening. The girl pushed him to jack up his product's price, swearing it was worth every penny then. Abel nodded and backed up every word. He said it was a good thing Gran was taking Kershey-chan on, because she should keep pushing him until he finally builds some self-worth. And next time he sets up a stall, he should learn to talk things through with Kershey-chan. But he couldn't just dump the treble on her, because she was running her own store too. She smiled and said, "No problem at all. I'm going to the 5-day market anyway, and I'd love to see Granisan's wares." Abel said Kershey-chan would help him no matter what, even if he had to pay for it. He'd still come out in the black. The girl pushed for a starting price anyone could afford, but insisted some items carried real special value. Then she set out to teach grandson how to be a true, sharp merchant. Gran doesn't want the life of a merchant. He'd rather sink his hands into real craftsmanship. Kershey thanked the guy for the day, then leaned in and asked the magician how he'd even found the 5-day market. He admitted he'd been stuck behind the counter the whole time while Gran busily wove friendship bracelets. And next time, he swore he'd finally slow down and actually explore. After the dust settled, the heroes sprinted back home, finally ready to breathe. But then they caught eerie noises nearby, and their guts screamed that a monster was lurking inside. The house door flew open, and a man bolted outside, shrieking like he'd seen the end of the world. Grant snapped to attention, desperate to figure out what the hell just happened. A stubborn tortoise had taken up residence just outside the city on the very road you needed, and it looked like it was daring everyone to get past. Rick Tortosa is a giant, turtle-like monster over 10 meters long, roaming rocky wastelands and volcanoes, and it shrugs off magic like it's nothing, with an A+ base power that swings from B all the way to S depending on the minerals locked inside its body, plus its skin's rock solid, while the meat is weirdly chicken-like, tender, delicate, and actually edible. Abel swore the monster looked dead serious. Gran fired back that it had to be about 10 meters off. The Rella decided to creep in quietly, staying just within shooting range. The hero ripped the weapon from Clay Road and powered it up with an upgrade. The very next day at the Adventurers Guild, they were buzzing every registered adventurer was getting shut down because not one of them could take down a rank A+ monster. D and C rank adventurers are getting begged to join the hunt an urgent must-do, because with that rank, an A+ monster can't be beat, plain and simple. So they're forced to send a recon team first, and that delay drags out closing the Eastern Highway, while supplies from the capital get wrecked and the city starts running dry fast. Even then, sending a hunting party won't save you casualties, can still hit. Someone even suggested a joint force of soldiers and adventurers, and Grant told the girl to wait while he asked for a minute. The hero told her, "If you want to investigate that monster, I can handle it." The girl's face lit up. She remembered him. He'd shown up the other day to sort out his B-rank transfer. Garn told us he'd hunted Rick tamed the smaller, iron-rich ones plus. He had a buddy in the Capitals Guild, an A-ranker no less. He's got advanced identification weight. What does that mean? Maybe he can even spot the minerals that make up Rick, Tors, and Abel. Then Tors Abel finally introduced himself. A and B stand there, ranking heroes, and right away the soldiers rush forward like, "Join us together, we'll crush them." Abel shoots back that the monster's power swings wildly from one member to the next, so he refuses to tag in with our reconnaissance. But once that highway got blocked, they got dragged into the mess like it was urgent. Right away, and Gran even said his buddy was tied to the Capitals Guild, so he couldn't call the shots there. The hero pressed the mage for reconnaissance, and Abel fired back that brute numbers don't automatically win battles. Still, if they had enough fighters whose attacks could actually crack that monster's defense, then they should go for it. The soldier said, not many masters can actually hurt a monster, so they ditched the odds and rolled straight to the guild. Gran snapped that no matter how many people they had who could hurt him, they still wouldn't stand a chance at beating him. The girl asked if a recon mission was on the table, and Gran promised they'd close in as tight as they could to grab intel on the specimen. But the girl shot back that no matter what, they had to keep their own safety first. Since this reconnaissance job is an A-rank monster mission, the reward is gonna match what you'd get for a B-rank monster extermination order. Kershi leaned in and asked if grandson could hold his own in negotiations. So since she wasn't exactly great with the Adventurers Guild business, soldier Almona decided to head into the guild and go hunting. And in the end, grandson and Abel would go scouting, so she pressed him. What if, out there, they ran into the monster, threw down, and came out victorious? Grand said the order would get reclassified, and once the monster's down, its materials either get split between them or the guild grabs them and hands them out. So yeah, if you can win, go in with your strongest crew. Abel said they weren't going hunting this time, they were only scouting and they dodge every reckless fight. Then the magician leaned in and demanded to know their chances of winning. The hero figured that if the monster wasn't made of missile, or chalcum, or top-tier adamantine, and if it didn't shrug off every hit, then victory might be within reach. He said it was basically up to Abel, but the mage confessed his magic couldn't touch the monster, so yeah, he was completely useless. Magic can't work, but that doesn't mean they're done. The heroes huddled up, planned like their lives depended on it, and hammered out the game plan step by step. The heroes got trapped in the mountains, and Gran stared down the enemy green and bluish blotches, mixing with nasty gray patches. Some looked like low-grade adamantine, and those green smudges were probably Jade's bar. Abel muttered that the whole upraise thing was totally pointless. Grand fired off the first things that popped into his head, and boom, the monster got an A+. That meant they'd already scouted it, upgraded their game, and were primed to move in. Last time, the hero killed Rick before it even clocked him. He drove an arrow straight into its head. That thing was small and puny, packed with high iron. Grant reckons it's gonna fire off one huge, wide-angle blast, one clean shot powered by pure grit and confidence. That monster won't go down in one swing, so Grant has to drain its HP and yank the aggro, then Abel can swoop in and seal the deal with magic. The hero tightened his grip, ready to unleash the plan. The adventurer went wild, stuffing the bow with as many boosting enchantments as he could, and even slapped power surges and slick illusion tricks onto the arrowheads, then immediately nodded like, this is a solid haul, even though he'd hammered this gear out just yesterday in a total rush. The hero swung his bow up at the monster, cranked his body strength to full throttle, and locked his aim on Rick Tortoise's eye. He loosed the arrow on the spot. His fist slammed down and connected with the target. Because of that illusion, the monster's sight can't snap back right away. Right after the grand rank, he gets a body enhancement potion. When the monster turns the tables, it fires off a sweeping elemental blast, and when earthquake attacks hit, it channels mana straight through its levitating boots to shrug them off. The hero stumbled right into the monster's shadow. That body enhancement potion he just chugged is only going to hit for about 5 minutes, so he's got to blow through it fast and slam the baton to Abel before it runs out. He had to pin him down, mocking the monster out so it couldn't sense Abel's presence. At first, he couldn't get a single step past the start. Grand yanked up with everything he had to try and hoist the monster. At first, the hero hesitated to use that one remedy because it packed a serious punch, but when push came to shove, he had no choice. This body-enhancing potion is brewed from Greenwake's blood. No, it's practically just blood straight up. He slammed back that potion. Greenwake's blood hit the hero's body instantly, and the effects surged through him at once. He grabbed the monster again and fought to hoist it up once more. He pulled it off. Then the hero hurled flasks and scattered a potion straight at the enemy. Grand bolted instantly, sprinting out of danger so the blast wouldn't hit him. Even after all that, he still wouldn't roll right now. He's stuck and out of action for a while. Now it's all on. Abel, he has to move. Grand guzzles the potion, and then the room starts spinning. Dizzy hits hard. The mage warned it would be a single, big, wide-angle blast to kick things off. Then Grand pulled his own move too. The hero shot back that it was nothing, just a simple mistake. Abel said, loud and certain, that from this moment on, he'd take care of everything by himself. The magician snapped into action and went to work right away. Grand thought that from the outside, his partner looked like a full-on demon lord. The magician poured every ounce of power into one mission, crushing the enemy. Rick's tortoise form is a nightmare built like a tank against physical hits and nearly unbreakable against magic, but even monsters like that are still alive. Every living thing needs one thing to survive: air. Abel fired off spatial magic, trapped the monster's space, and sucked all the air out of it. Grant figured that made an A-rank friend pretty much unstoppable. Everyone blinked, and the monster vanished like it was never there, leaving them totally clueless. Grant snapped that he pushed too close, and the moment he did, the thing started acting up. Somehow, the A-rank adventurer Abel crushed him, and just like that, everything was fine. Rick. Tortissa One's carcasses were even sealed away with spatial magic. The soldiers stared in disbelief, because this wasn't some tiny room at all, it was massive, and Abel backed up every word the hero had said. The soldiers swore magic would only make this monster worse. But Abel snapped back that bad didn't mean it failed, it just wasn't simple. They cornered him and demanded, "So you're the real White Knight Mage from the Capital Guild, huh?" The magician swore the girl looked like someone he knew, but when she spoke, she crushed that idea. Familiar wasn't even the right word. Iona leaned in and said this legendary magician was basically the most famous great spellcaster within reach of the capital. She also spotted the guy beside him, Mr. Gran, the one everyone called the Tamer of the Flame Beasts. The hero swore he really was Gran, but he wasn't some tame and trained softy. He just battered people with raw physical power, and when the girl heard it, her face lit up. Rumors then whipped through the Capital's Guild's rough adventurers, all the way to the City Guard Guild's staff. They claimed Gran and the others had been getting fed, one at a time, like a trainer winding up wild beasts. The soldiers stared in shock as they realized they were famous adventurers, and the girl grinned and said yep, they were BIG in the capital with their own fan club too, and she even heard that both of them were the legendary Dragon Slayers. Abel straight up confirmed every last bit of it was true. The top-tier guild card doesn't just list names, it captures the pure magic of S-rank adventurers, and anyone even beyond that. The soldier swore he got it. The mage declared the monster's threat was handled, and now the soldiers had to race back and tell their lord. The girl practically begged the heroes to shake her hand just so she could keep it as a souvenir. Abel thanked her for keeping things calm, and she promised, "I'll tell the whole fan club and I'll write it up in our club magazine." Grana couldn't believe the story blew all the way up and actually ended up in the magazine. The adventurers finally showed up at Alicia and Kirsha's doorstep. Gran grabbed Abel's attention and demanded he hand over the monster meat he'd found. Skin and shell could wait because cooking all that meat was going to take ages. Then they tore back to a man, slapped their report onto the guild's table, and butchered the carcass right there, handing over the extra goods so the guild wouldn't start prying into their reckless mess. Pacero's shop sent word straight to Kirsha and Alicia, inviting them over for dinner, and he promised that someday he'd cook them dishes made from that very monster. He hacked the exact required amount of meat from that massive carcass. He piled in horseradish, juicy meat, a bunch of herbs, earthy mushrooms, and a heap of vegetables. Trying Rick. Tortoise first didn't just pop into his head. It came straight from a memory of a past life, because the thing looked like it had soft, squishy turtle flesh. This animal's liver hit like a punch way too stimulating. He remembered soft-shelled turtles could do the same, so he scrutinized the meat with an appraiser and saw the label actually matched safe consumption. After that, all that was left was to cook it. That's how you squeeze even more ink materials out of every single bottle so you can stretch them out without wasting a drop. If it's only for one hero, that promise could stretch out for a whole lifetime. Then once the broth hits perfect, he pours in more sake to kill the smell and tosses in the meat and liver. Grant skims off the film, cooks it down until it's fully done, and then drizzles everything with soy sauce for the final hit of flavor. They slice the vegetables one by one, then toss them in at the very last second right before you start eating. Next, he pours out the oil and cranks up the deep fry one batch. Goes straight in, and the other half gets salted and soaked in soy sauce. Right now, his oil is heating up, ready to go. He dunks each piece one by one into the deep fryer, and the oil seethes like it's alive. The sizzling scent of fried food hits his nose and instantly kicks his hunger into overdrive. That deep-fried meat came out sizzling and looked straight up unreal. The hero felt like he'd absolutely nailed it, then decided to follow through exactly like they'd promised. He grabbed a single piece of meat with his chopsticks. He took a bite and savored every second of it, only to realize it tasted blander than he'd imagined, like chicken's twin, but with a tougher bite, firmer meat, and a deep umami richness that hit the moment he chewed. That dish hit way harder than the one he'd chowed down back in that old dungeon. He must have cooked it smarter this time, because this monster was way higher ranked. And yeah, he devoured that hot grilled chicken like it was pure gold, then loved it even more than he expected, and now he's dead set on ranking that monster meat, not just by quality, but by the temperature it hits your plate with. Now the hero's eyes locked on the monster's skin, and he decided he was taking it. That gooey edge of the shell, called Emperor, isn't just for show. It's edible too. So he hacks off the Emperor and rips it into strips, then chops the enoki mushrooms into bite-sized pieces. Emperor's basically pure collagen, perfect for glowing skin, and he's dead certain Alicia is going to love it. He flinched at the sliced embaru, then plunged it and enoki into a pot of roaring, boiling water. When they're finished, he hustles them into fresh colanders and lets every last drop drain out completely. Toss the cucumber into a bowl, sprinkle in a little salt and sugar, mix it all up, then pour in the vinegar, and shoves it into storage to marinate it, soaking everything in flavor like magic. Then another dish is ready, only this time it's for the crowd that loves to drink. Back in his old life, sashimi was his go-to. He'd slice the meat and liver into thick, medium cuts without a second thought. He blasts the milk with boiling water, chills it in icy water, then pours it right into the meat. Then he lines everything up on perfect leaves and serves it. Boom. The dish is ready. Grand blared, Abel, everything's almost ready. Two guests burst out of two different doors at the exact same time, rushing toward dinner. Grant grinned at his forest friend. Then Abel insisted the animal wasn't attacking at all. It was just meditating. They slammed the dishes down and set the whole table in place. Abel bragged that it was straight up amazing, like everything was cooked with the meat of that monster, while Grant snapped that he'd basically just tossed vegetables into the nave, so they'd better start with something else. Grant handed the heroes an aperitif, and Abel's fears spiked. What if it was like Taraz's blood? The hero warned. It's been stripped and watered down with wine because it only works as a hard tonic, so people drink it cut with alcohol. Abel told Grant, if you say it's all good, I'll trust you. But if you're trying to soften it with wine, use this instead, because he'd secretly smuggled it from his family home. The heroes dug in and started demolishing dinner. They winced and took a sip, like it burned. But trust me, this wine hits perfectly with sashimi. Abel finally set the record straight. He just had to answer one big question. Is sashimi really raw meat? Grant swore the meat was fresh and scrubbed clean and told Abel to calm his nerves by tasting it through the upraise. But the mage didn't buy it because that would wreck the whole meal, so he flat out refused. The moment he took that first bite, he knew he was absolutely hooked on the dish. Abel expected it to hit like something fishy, but nope, it tastes neutral, the bite is super firm, and it makes you want to keep sipping. Just don't go overboard with the blood. Suddenly, the magician clocked a grilled chicken right in front of him and went, "All right, I'm trying that too." He said the sashimi was great too, but he still craved the grilled stuff, because that firm, satisfying bite was hands down the best he'd ever tasted, and Grant nodded, saying it matched his kind of taste perfectly. Then the magician leaned in and asked what he liked most, and Grant shot back that he loved both dishes, because it all depended on the day. Abel insisted it was exactly like him, and the heroes pushed their force buddy to go taste something else. Then Grant set fresh dishes on the table, vinegar marinated bites, and a steaming nabe, insisting it wasn't exactly a soup, because it was built on meat and vegetables, with a broth so drinkable you couldn't waste it, because you'd need every last drop for the next course, and Abel couldn't help but notice again that his partner always knew her stuff. And this is the kind of luxurious seasoning dish that turns everything up to a whole new level.